If you want them to see you walk across.
I don't know. To be honest, I wasn't paying attention. I don't know what other people did.
Yeah, you don't pay attention to me a lot.
I was threatened with violence if I took the chair from Michael, but now that it's here, I can do it.
Yeah, it's all set.
Tiaras and tweeds go really well together. Oh man, you look so cute. You do. You're regal.
I know the
Yeah.
chair. It's not the first time.
Yeah.
Next
Can you
year's
say it
take
again?
off crown is definitely.
Is it not working?
Yeah.
You're all
Okay,
gonna
let me try.
act like you're
I'm getting used to it.
Should be live now, so let me see.
I see that you're.
Man, did you send a bio?
Did I send a file?
Bio.
I think you did as well. Yeah, to be honest.
Try that, right?
We have noise canceling headphones.
Yeah, that's good.
Works.
Extra. I was gonna say. Post-it notes.
Okay, so we just tweet out the link to the afternoon stream, so we'll give that just a moment or two for people to get that up and running.
Sure.
Okay, so starting off our next group of presenters, we have Matt Kane. Matt is a hockey analyst, researcher, and writer who is focused on tackling hockey's biggest questions, like whether an AHL team could have beaten the 2014-15 Buffalo Sabres. His work has appeared at HockeyGraphs, Hockey Perspectives, Winner's View, and on his own website, Puck++. Matt can be found on Twitter at @Kane_.
It's up there. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone for coming back after lunch. I think that was what you were supposed to do. And most of you look away too, which is great. Today I'm here to talk to you about predicting NHL player contracts. Why do we want to do this? Starting off, why predict player contracts? Why not just listen to the insiders who will tell us that how much was Draisaitl going to get, 10 million, 12 million, whatever. There are a few reasons. Primarily, long-term salary cap planning is one of them. If you're a GM or you work for a team, you have limited resources to pursue free agents. You can't just go after everyone. You can't literally be calling every agent about every player on free agent day. And also, you need to know where your own salary cap is going to stand. You need to have some sort of estimate as to what fair value for your upcoming free agents are. So it can help you keep track of how much potential cap room you're going to have to improve your team or to possibly fill with fine clubs. It's useful for players or agents to know to know how much statistically similar players have been paid. You obviously don't want to leave money on the table. If everyone who has the same numbers as you is making $5 million, you don't really want to take a $2 million deal. It can help agents or players identify teams who overpay versus the market. I will not name any GMs here. Or find cheap free agent talent. If you're a GM and you're looking for someone who is likely to get a low dollar deal that you think is worth a lot. And most importantly, it can help identify players whose price is different than their value. And this is a big distinction that I want to get out of the way. First, what I'm looking at predicting here is a player's price, how much it's going to cost to acquire or keep a player under contract going forward. That is obviously a very different concept from value. Value we could measure in goals above placement, we could measure in goals above average, we could measure in wins. But value is really what they're going to provide to you on the ice. Value and price in an ideal world should be the same. Almost all the time they are not. You can look at David Clarkson, Dave Bowman. There are hundreds of examples of places where value is very obviously far from the actual price that teams are paying. And as a bonus, it gives something for a lot of strangers to tell you you're wrong about it on the internet. In terms of past work that's been done, I have personally run models for the past 3 off seasons to predict free agent salaries. I started in 2014-15 with this really, really simple model, a linear regression. I think it used 6 variables: goals, assists, power play time on ice, shorthand time on ice, something else. And looked at UFA skaters only. The problem with that model was that it predicted negative salaries for some players. So as much as you'd like to have Bolton Orr pay you $500,000 to play for your team, as much as that might give you fair value, actually, the CBA doesn't really allow that. And I think you'd have a tough time convincing the Players Association to change that. The year after that, I used data regression to predict it, expanded it to RFA skaters. Won't go into too much detail on data regression, but basically what I did there was transform the cap hit. In the first year, I looked at cap hit percentage, what percentage of the cap the players played. In the second year, I looked at between the minimum and maximum salary a player can get. You can basically put them on a scale from 0 to 1 and try to predict that. So data regression works well for that. Added in RFAs, got a little bit better on accuracy. This past season, some of you may see me tweeting about this all the time on Twitter. I built a random force model, added in goalies, got a lot more accurate. The big benefit of random force is that it really allows us to capture a lot of the non-linearity in predicting some of these things. So the average error on the contracts came down significantly this year. It did pretty good, I think. Still, obviously, a lot of room for improvement, or I couldn't be up here talking. But I'm not the only one who's done this. Manny Perry built a model a few years ago using Pioneer's neighbors that did really well. Luke Solberg, who's evolving wild on Twitter, built a regression using some of the more advanced stats like WAR, game score, time on ice. Chris Watkins also has a model. Carolyn Wilkie has her salary cap bands that allow you to see how different metrics tend to be valued by the league and how players are performing relative to similarly paid players for different metrics. So, getting into this year's model, as I said, it used random force to predict what I call the adjusted cap hit at the time of signing. So if a player signed a deal a year in advance of the actual free agency, it looked at what's the cap today, how much are they signing for, and taking the difference between the minimum cap hit, the least you can pay them, and the maximum cap hit, the most you can pay them. Again, scale from 0 to 1, just to be fixable. The variables that I used to model the player salary were total stats from NHL.com over the prior year and the past 3 years. I used NHL.com for 2 reasons. Number one, it's really simple to get all that data together and to merge that data with CapFriendly's data because they all have the names the same way, and you don't have to worry about Matthew Murray or Matt Murray or whatever he wants to be called, or Johnny Oduya. The other reason is that most is that if you look at the same back of the hockey card stats, that's what a GM's going to look at. That's what agents are using in their negotiations, and so that it should have some connection to the price of players played. Other factors: past contract history, the player's last cap hit. That was a variable I added in this year that, again, it tends to have a significant effect on what players will play in the future. So if you're really high paid, the odds that you're going to take a super big pay cut are pretty low. And similarly, if you're a guy who's constantly underpaid, Cody Franzen maybe, you're probably not going to get a huge deal on your next deal, regardless of how your performance is. Contract timing, whether a player signs his extension before they hit free agency or not, and free agency status. UFAs versus RFAs, obviously there's going to be a difference in how those players are paid, as well as whether the last contract was bought. So what's new in what I'm talking about today? I've changed the model a little bit. So the major factor that I've added is including the term or the length of the contract as a predictor in the model. I think the most obvious way that you can see the impact of this is if you look at a bridge deal versus a long-term deal for a restricted free agent. Those bridge deals are for a lot less money. The long-term deals are for a lot more money. And because of that, one of the new things I had to do was predict the term and the salary. So using the same variables that we're using to predict salary, all those NHL.com stats, it hits, even penalty minutes, we throw those in a model and we try to predict how many years a player is going to get on the next contract. I changed from using raw totals to using z-scores. The main impetus for that was to take into account that like scoring rates have really changed over the last 10 years or so. So no one's scoring 65 goals anymore. If a player scores 65 goals today, they're probably going to get paid more than a player who scored 65 goals 10 years ago. And then lastly, I took the buyouts out of the model in general. The buyouts were always wrong in the old model. They always looked to be over or underpaid when they signed their $1 million deal, mainly because they're being paid by so take them out, model them on their own, and you get a much better view of what a player should be paid. So, is the new model actually any good? The way I evaluated this was I trained the model on everything before this offseason, and then I looked at all the contracts this offseason, other than the extensions, the contract extensions like Jack Eichel's, where he didn't actually hit free agency. And I looked at the mean absolute error and the mean absolute percentage error. So I presented 3 versions of the new model. Because the new model includes a variable for the length of the contract, you can look at accuracy in a few different ways. So the first way, which is the second line there, is to use the predicted term. We have a model that says we think anyways, we have a model that says Jamie Benn's going to get an 8-year deal, so we'll plug in 8 years into our salary prediction model. Another way to look at it is to weight all of the possible contract values. So weight the value for a 1-year contract with the probability of a 1-year contract, value for a 2-year contract by the probability of a 2-year contract. So you can use weighted average term, or you can look at it with the actual term. The problem with actual term is obviously you don't know that until the contract is signed. But you're going to get better predictions. So in general, no matter which of the new models you chose, you tended to do a lot better. The mean absolute error decreased from between 50,000 to about 160,000 in our sample, and the mean absolute percentage error went down about 5 to 10%. The term model was okay. It was right on about 50%, 49.4% of the contract lengths. That's good, but there's also a lot of like freebie little 1-year deals that you're not necessarily getting a lot of added information from. So there's definitely some room. Obviously, I don't have it up here, but the biggest factor in the decrease in absolute error that we see is due to adding term into the model. It's a hugely important variable. Intuitively, that makes sense, but also good to see that in the data that comes through as well. What is the new model bad at? A lot of things. It's still a model, so it's not perfect. I can't kidnap everyone and say, don't have an isolator like Micah and force their agents to reveal how much they're worth. It's still bad at predicting super high-end players. Every model that I built to predict salary has had trouble with guys like Connor McDavid, guys like Austin Matthews. It's hard to, there's just not a lot of sample to get a correct estimate on them. That's my hypothesis. For most players, as term increases, predicted salary increases. If you look at, that kind of makes sense in some cases, like bridge deals versus long-term deals. We expect long-term deals to be worth more than bridge deals. But if you go from 6 to 8 years, you would expect in some cases an 8-year deal to be worth less than a 6-year deal. Mostly because the player's getting added security there at the expense of perhaps a few dollars. So if you look at TJ Oshie's most recent deal, I think a lot of people thought he would get more money, but he got those 8 years rather than 6 years. So a lot of people were a bit. Yeah. And the last thing is older players, or the olds. It's really hard to model someone like Yager because there aren't a lot of players who are that old, and it's hard to know basically what they're going to get. Part of the problem there is that a lot of these players retire, so you could have two statistically very similar players. If one of them doesn't come back and sign another contract, you don't really get that information fed into the model. So how can we use this data? A few examples. We can look at who are the most overpaid players this offseason, which I've called GM errors. And at the top is Jack Eichel. That's a few more serious.
Just being polite.
Yeah. Again, that he's above the expected cap hit. He's probably what you would consider one of those, higher end players who the model may be underestimating his true price. But there's also a lot of players who you think the team will probably have overpaid, like Eric Branson, who got nearly twice his predicted cap hit on the 1-year deal, which is actually very unlike the Canucks. They did fairly well this offseason, keeping things to the predicted price. Underpaid players, which are the model errors. The Chicago Blackhawks seem to do very well, as they have in frequent off seasons, mostly due to their cap crunch and bringing back players on relatively good value deals compared to what the model would predict. So Patrick Sharp and Cody Franzen collectively signed for about $2.5 million, which under their predicted price, which has obviously been a major boon to keeping them afloat. We can also look at predicting next contract term. So I have Austin Matthews there in the, looks like orange, and Mitch Marner in the green. These graphs are going to be a little bit skewed in the current state because they've only got 1 year of data, and usually most of these players have 2 years before they're actually signing their next deal. But you can see already the model's identified that Matthews is likely to get a long-term deal, whereas it's kind of divided on Marner. Marner, his most likely contract looks like a 2-year deal right now, but the model's also hedging a little bit and saying, he could turn into a 6-year player. So as the year goes on, he's going to accumulate more stats. These predictions are obviously going to change, and I suspect Marner's predicted term will go out to the right significantly. But if he has a down year, then maybe not. And the last example is long-term cap planning, or are the Sens at risk of losing Erik Karlsson, which I didn't think I wanted to know the answer to before I asked this question, and now I also don't want to know the answer to. So for those of you who don't know, Erik Karlsson is a free agent in 2019-2020. The model projects his contract at an 8-year, $7.6 million deal. Obviously, again, this is probably a pretty conservative estimate for the top tier players of what they're projected. So we'll use 7.6 million as like the safest. Maybe they get a good deal on it. They've got about 6 forwards, 2 defensemen, and 2 goalies signed for 2019-20 that take up about $40 million between those 10 players. They have other, I should have put key in quotes, free agents coming up because Cody Ceci is on that list. But between Kyle Turris, Mark Stone, Cody Ceci, and Derek Brassard, it should cost them just over $21 million. If we take all that together and assume that the cap goes up to about $80 million in 2019-2020, that leaves the $11.5 million for 4 forwards and 3 defensemen, which is not a lot of money for seven roster players, basically. Thomas Chabot will still be on his entry-level deal for 1 year, so that may bail them out shortly, but Colin White will probably need a new deal at that point as well. So the Sens could be in a little bit of contract trouble. Believe it or not, it is difficult to run an NHL team with Dion Phaneuf and Bobby Ryan making $15 million combined. So we'll see where it goes. Perhaps they can jettison Broussard or make some other moves to keep him around. But as it stands, it looks like it could be a difficult situation. So future work, just to wrap up. Again, want to improve the churn model. The churn model tends to default to a one-year deal for a lot of players. It's the most likely outcome in a lot of cases. So I think there's probably some improvements to be made there. Add in some more subjective variables that may capture how a GM or an agent of the league feels how good they are. So 3-star selections, award voting, captaincy, how long you've been with the team, all factors that may impact what a player gets. Making better adjustments for injuries and early career players. Since we use 3-year windows, a lot of the time with some of the top players on their ELCs, they're signing the deal after 2 years, so they don't have the full 3-year window, so their stats look a little bit skewed. And again, Connor McDavid's injury really changes his stat profile, so he doesn't look like as good a player as he should look like. And then lastly, including advanced metrics and one-member metrics for player value, stuff like Corsi, WAR, K, etc. Thank you.
Woohoo! All hail our king, Alex.
All right, thank you, Matt. Next speaker, we have Alex Novid. Alex Novid is an editor of Hockey Graphs, where his previous work is focused on neutral zone play and league-wide analysis. Outside of hockey, he is a strategy data analyst for Cisco Meraki, a cloud networking company. He lives in Berkeley, California, and can be found on Twitter at
Thanks for having me. So regrettably, I spend a lot of time on Twitter. And one of the things I've heard, and generally paraphrase on Twitter, is the low-hanging fruit has already been taken. We figured out a few years ago, we've got Corsi is good. We know that goons are probably bad. We know that goalies are an unsolvable mystery of the universe. And beyond that, anything big past this is going to involve more advanced metrics. We need more math and statistics, and it's not something that we have just like very basic stuff to go out and find. But I spend a bunch of time looking at neutral zone data, where I think there really is a lot of that still available. And so today I'm going to go through some of the things that can be found thanks to the incredible, barely human work of Corey Schneider and all of his tracking on zone exits and entries. And really hope to bring about a few key points and hopefully teach you guys something new, and also provoke some new questions that other people can look into as well. So a couple of big summary points that have come out of this are, surprisingly to me, looking at zone exits, passes actually do slightly better, and I'll show you why I think that. The carryouts are almost essentially as good, but there's a huge drop off, I think, as expected between those and dumping the puck out of the zone. And part of the reason for that is that throughout the entire transition game, possession is really key. Whereas on the forecheck, pressure is really key. So it's all about a game of making sure that your opponent is taking the sort of actions that you want them to, which means giving up the puck. And then finally, we have a lot more to learn on these topics. So just the plan for right now is first of all just a very brief intro into what neutral zone play is. Then a whole bunch of different assortment of things that we can find, specifically looking just at newly tracked zone entries, or zone exits rather. And then finally, looking at transitions, because for the first time, we can connect zone exit data with zone entry data, with passes on that entry data, and really put together a full vision of what's happening in the entire process from a team getting the puck in one end of the rink to taking a shot in the other. So a brief intro just for people who aren't familiar with this background. So zone exits and zone entries are just a simple way to calculate something objective, getting at the fact that you want to get from defense to offense. And thankfully, this is one of those times where there is quite literally a bright line painted on the ice for you to track that. So a zone exit is any time a player gets the puck into the defensive zone, are they able to successfully get it out is something you can count. Then once they're in the neutral zone, are they successfully able to get into the offensive zone? And then here I'm referring to that full process as zone transition. You can also think of it essentially as breakouts. I'm leaving that off because I don't get super into like the tactics and systems, what I think breakouts really denotes, but that's definitely a big part of what this sort of play involves. So zone exits. Congratulations. You are in the defensive zone and you've gotten the puck. At this point, you have two options. Either one, you can convince the other team to start Vesicoscola, or two, you can get the puck yourself from your zone into the offensive zone. And there's a few ways that that can go. There's ideally an exit with possession, which could be you skate it out yourself, there's carry out. It could be you pass it to your teammate, getting out of the zone as a pass, or you dump out the puck and then either recover it or don't recover it. And then, or there's failure. So that's no exit at all. You turn it over, the other team gets it back, or an icing and it comes back into your zone. Also, I put the raw counter here so you can get a sense of the sample size we're dealing with. All of this data comes from Corey Snyder. If you're not familiar with him, follow Shutdown Line on Twitter. Please support his work as that makes all of this possible. He is in the process of tracking every transition event from both this season and last season. So because of that, we have almost 100,000 rows of zone exits. So 100,000 zone exits, that includes every single one from a few different teams in the league and at least 25 games from a bunch of others. So every single team has at least 25 games in here. And so it's looking at, how are we successfully getting out? But I think that the traditional version of looking at zone exits, did they get the puck out of the defensive zone? I think that's too easy. I think we need to expand the definition of failure there to include if you just throw it out and the other team immediately gets it back. And if there's one thing that I know in my lifelong history as an Islander fan, it's expanding the definition of failure. I'm taking shots at plenty of other teams. I'll take my own. And so, if you clear out the puck and just throw it out, that's better than not doing it. I think the obvious parallel is, Ken Wilson's famous line on blocking shots, that it's better than not doing it. It's better than keeping the puck in your own zone. But, the best you're doing is you're giving your defense a chance to regroup. You might get a couple of people off for a change, but the other team still has the puck and they're not very far away. And so I think a better way to look at this that we can now do, thanks to Corey's data, is are you then going from that zone exit and getting an entry? Have you turned this into offense, or have you just temporarily delayed the goal against? And so when we do that, we can see a bunch of new information and really assess how well different types of zone exits are working. And so the first thing we can do is just the general type of zone exit. And here we see the possession is absolutely huge. So what this is looking at is depending on what they do to get out of the zone, do they then get the next entry? And if they carry the puck out, or if they pass the puck out, the answer is almost definitely yes. And in fact, almost equally yes, which was surprising to me. I'd have guessed that passing it out helps spread out the ice and helps you a bit more, but it turns out they're basically equivalent here. And we'll see later on why I still think passes have an advantage. Dump outs, on the other hand, you have a 1 in 5 chance of then immediately turning that into an entry because it's really hard to get the puck back once you've thrown it out there. The interesting thing is that we can split out both ones that just turn into clears versus ones where they then recover the puck in the neutral zone. And if they do get the puck back in the neutral zone, then the success rate jumps up to 87%, almost identical as the other two. So it's not necessarily about exactly how you're getting out of the zone. The point is, are you in the neutral zone with the puck? And it's what you should do that if you keep the puck the whole time. And then if not, then it's all about can you get it back in time to turn it into something. So now, for the next few slides, I want to break it down a little bit further into some more details about the individual zone exits. So the first one is, when you're in the defensive zone, what side of the ice are you trying to go up to make that exit? And what we see here, there's a bunch going on, but essentially, if you're going up the center of the ice, you end up having a bit more success. And there's a bunch of selection bias in there. Somebody's more likely to go up the center of the ice, probably doesn't have quite as much pressure there. There's probably, whether the other team's changing, it might be an easier situation. But, on the whole, we definitely see this pretty dramatic difference where if you're going up the center of the ice, 26% of the time you're skating it up, 36% of the time you're making a pass. Whereas, for going up one of the sides, you're much more likely to make that dump out of the zone. And if you saw it, that's more likely to just give the puck back and not lead to your own entry. Also, there's essentially no difference between the left and the right side. Everything I looked at was basically identical. We don't see that, this is the side that tends to have stronger people doing zone exits or anything like that. Also, where it's completely identical is between periods. I think there's some interesting things that can be done with score effects that I've not yet done. But in terms of between periods, there's really no difference in what happens, both in what they try and do to get out of the zone, in the pace of how they get out of the zone. There's like a 1% jump in the likelihood of recovering the dump out on the second period. If I'm making up a story for a 1% difference there, that's because it's the long change, they might be timing their changes well and having somebody get out there. But I'm not declaring that 1% difference is going to be a dramatic change in how people are playing. There's also, if you look at pace, a few more zone exits in the first period and the second or third, but again, not much that really matters. But where we do see a ton of difference and a ton of difference in success is in whether or not the person making the zone exit is being pressured. And this, I think, makes the huge case to really make sure that you have an aggressive forecheck who's really forcing them to dump out the puck, because that's what we see here. Whenever somebody has no pressure on them when they're making that first decision out of the zone, more often than not, they're going to get an exit with possession. Whereas all of those success rates dramatically drop whenever you get a person on them, forcing them to make a play. There's definitely some selection bias here. I'm thinking of a recent article actually in Soccer where optic tracking has a big chance, qualitative 1 or 0 variable, sort of like a scoring chance. And it turns out that when you go back and look at it, they sort of biased it where if there was a goal on that play, they went back and said, I guess that was a big chance, which makes sense. And there could be something here where it's like, if they get it out, then it's, I guess it wasn't that much pressure. But I still think the numbers are dramatic enough that there really is something here going on that really shows the advantage of having an aggressive forecheck. And, for the breakout team, it still definitely is possible to get an exit with possession when you are being pressured. I know you can do a carry out, get around a guy and exit the zone because I've seen Nick Lottie play. And I know that when you face pressure in the defensive zone, you can immediately toss it to your nearest teammate because I've seen Shane Weber play. And so, I really think that this speaks to that advantage and the importance of playing and coaching around that. And then even if, that aggression doesn't work necessarily when you're in the defensive zone, even if once you get into the neutral zone, you still see that having been pressured in the defensive zone still has an impact in the neutral zone if they're carrying it out. If they're passing it, if they're dumping it, it washes out. You have the same entry success rate, which makes sense. But if you're carrying it out, that guy who was pressuring him is probably still right on him, still applying that pressure, and that's where you see the success rates drop again. So you see another advantage to that. We can also look at team metrics. So this is, on the x-axis, how often does the team choose to use a dump out as their exit versus how good are they at recovering it. And we see there really isn't much of a difference here. There's no real relationship. Teams who dump out the puck more aren't more successful at getting it back. That's not really their fault. It's because that y-axis, the recovery rate, how good are you at recovering dump outs, isn't really repeatable. This is something with the bigger sample size we might see more. But what the data says right now is, how good you are at recovering things out of the zone. It's pretty much chance. But descriptively, we can at least see how did each team do last season. And we see, Toronto, this has been talked about online today, they were really effective, probably by chance, but there could be something specific in their game and their speed about recovering those dumps out of the zone. We see LA, a team that's known for dumping the puck into the offensive zone, actually very, very rarely dump the puck out of the defensive zone. And then this is normally where I make fun of a Western Canadian team, but here it's just Colorado. What do you guys know? We can also then, within an individual team, take a deeper look. And what I want to do right now is show you what we can see for passes out of the defensive zone. So we can see who gets the puck and is passing it out of the zone and who's receiving that pass. So since we have all of the data tracked for Arizona, I wanted to show what that network looks like. So here we have, who is making the pass out of the defensive zone and who is receiving that pass. And we can get a bunch of averages. First of all, no surprise, they are the Ekman-Larson show. That is fundamentally what they do. And we also see when he's not on the ice, that responsibility shifts almost entirely to Goligoski. They're the ones getting the puck and getting it out of the zone. And then from there, it goes to really a whole mix of forwards. We also see, it gets a little bit messier on the right side, but for Ibata and Domi, actually those two have also done a bunch where they will, even though they're forwards, do a bunch of that passing either to each other or to another forward and take on both roles of being the one who passes it out and the one who receives it. The Rangers are messier. The Rangers don't have quite as much defensive help in the back now. They, and because of that, they have this system where a lot more forwards are involved in those passes. So you see this whole mess where Zuccarello, Stepan, Miller, Hayes are all involved on either side of the passes because they don't have that same, defensive providing that outlet pass. And then with a couple minutes time remaining, I want to talk about something I think this is the first time we're able to do, where thanks to tracking exits and entries in the same games, we can see here's the exit and all of the details about it, and here's the entry that immediately followed it, and we can see that whole chain and see, does the zone exit affect the following zone entry? And what we see is it does in some cases. So we know from previous neutral zone work that in general, you want to then have a carry-in instead of a dumping into the zone. For very similar reasons, you have possession, you're more likely to get a shot. And we see that here, where if you have a pass or if you carry it out, you're more likely to then carry it into the zone. This is also where we see that that pass actually does a little bit better than the carry out. I suspect this is where you see by passing it, you're getting into a different part of the neutral zone. You probably have more open space. And so that's where you see it's easier to get into the offensive zone with possession. We can also look at the timing and see how long does it take to get from the zone exit to the zone entry. And there's really not a lot of time. On average, it's about 5 seconds to get from your defensive line to the offensive line. And it takes a little bit longer for dumping it in than carrying it in. And there's cause and effect here that's hard to really piece out. But there's definitely a case here that if you're getting a body onto the person trying to carry it in, you're more likely to slow them down in that second and get them to dump it out or dump it into the zone instead. After that, though, there isn't really much of an effect. So anything you're doing in the defensive zone, beyond whether or not you're carrying it in, then it pretty much washes out. So if you look at how long the time it takes to get in, we see, right, you can sort of make out at the very beginning. If you're going super fast, that's probably a fast break. You might get a little bit more shots per entry, but past work has said basically that how many shots you get per entry is mostly randomness. And this pretty much backs that up, that we don't see a ton of obvious information there. Then the last slide I'll show is one that's probably not repeatable. These stats, at least in the sample we currently have, are not repeatable. With a full season's data, I'd be interested to take another look. But for now, treat this only as descriptively what happened last year and nothing predictively of how are these teams going to do next year. And we do see, Columbus was a team that had super long times for both teams. They spent a ton of time slowing things down in the neutral zone. And this is a way that we can really quantify that. And I'm told by people who know the Blue Jackets a lot better than I do that this actually was a coaching focus for them last year to really get more pressure on them and be more involved there. You also see teams like Nashville or the Rangers where their transitions went pretty quickly, but the other teams were much slower. And that, I think, especially for the Rangers, the story there could potentially be their counterattacking style, where they're slowing things down on the way over, but then they're trying to get the fast breaks going the other way. And for now, there is a relationship, but that, I would ignore this blue line for now until we see any evidence that it's descriptive. It seems right now there's a relationship, but not a ton of evidence there. And so, just to wrap up, I hope this has given you some new answers, but More importantly than that, I hope this has given you some new questions. The metaphor that I've been thinking about is this archaeological dig, where Corey has done all of the actual hard work of going through the sites, of digging things up, of scattering all of the sites of things. And I hope what I've done is I've brushed off a couple of bones on this thing and said, yeah, there's something in here, we should look at it some more. And there's a ton more to be done here. So if you're interested in getting involved in this is counting and addition and division, and I think there's a ton of super interesting things to find out about hockey. So if you support Corey and have access to his data, contact me and I will share all of my stuff that connects that data, that has all of this stuff, that cleans up that data a little bit. And hopefully we can learn a whole lot more about NHL transitions in general. Thank you.
You're sharing those slides right now. Yeah, I have to take those back on that day. Thank you.
Oh.
All right, thank you, Alex. And our last presenter of this session is Brian McDonald. Brian McDonald is entering his fourth season as the Florida Panthers Director of Hockey Analytics, where he's responsible for analyzing data in both hockey operations and business operations. He previously spent 6 years as an assistant associate professor in the Department of Mathematical Science at West Point, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, and a Master of Arts and a PhD in Mathematics from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. Brian is also currently an adjunct professor in sports analytics in the College of Business at Florida Atlantic University.
All right, thank you. And thanks for having me here to speak. So I'm going to do something that might seem like it's a little off topic. So we're going to do a little bit of business analytics stuff. That's been a lot of what I've been doing over the past many months with the Panthers. So we're going to talk a little bit about predicting attendance for NHL games. And while I can't talk about what we do internally in terms of hockey analytics a lot, I can freely talk about what we do in business analytics. And I can't really work with Mike Peterson from the Tampa Bay Lightning on hockey analytics stuff. We can collaborate on business analytics stuff. So this is kind of a project. I started talking about this maybe 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, something like that. That we're both we're doing in our organizations and have sort of just built upon since then. So this is joint work with Mike Peterson and then also James Seafood with the Panthers. So why do we want to talk about this? So what's the goal? Should always start with some sort of goal. Maybe not always, but a lot of times. So our goal in this case is we want to develop a model for predicting attendance for NHL games that uses only information known before tickets go on sale. And the reason for that is the the decisions that we kind of have to make, some of the decisions that we have to make are done in the off season. They're done before tickets go on sale. For example, if you're going to set the price of tickets, that has to be done usually before tickets go on sale. So we only want to use information that is known at that time. So one of the things that we want to do is, games are not all games are priced the same. So we have our, least interesting games in Tuesday night in October or something like that, and then we have much more interesting games that are a Saturday against the original 6 team like Montreal between Christmas and New Year's or something like that. Those games would definitely attract different levels of interest and price accordingly. I think almost all teams now do this with their games. There's variable pricing for games. So that's one reason we might want to do this. Another reason we might want to do this is what kinds of things do we want to request when the league is developing a schedule. So that was another motivation when we first started this. Somebody asked the question, do we actually prefer to have a good team on a Saturday and a bad team during the week? And by good and bad, I don't mean like winning percentage wise. I mean a good drawing team for us and a bad drawing team for us. So do we want to stack the Saturdays with the good teams, or do we kind of want to spread it out and put the good teams on a Tuesday and the not as good teams on a Saturday? And same thing Thanksgiving week. So the first thing that we could do is plot some raw data. And so what we're going to see here is attendance by game for these 10 seasons, I guess, for all 30 teams. And I should note that the attendance is not necessarily number of tickets sold or number of people in the building. It's announced attendance. However, and different teams compute announced attendance differently, but typically it's paid tickets plus comp tickets or something like that. But this is announced attendance, and you can find this publicly. This is the only publicly available thing that we could get for all 30 teams, so that's why we use this. That's part of why we use this. We also use our own internal data, but we only have that for us, and we only have reliable data. Actually, at the time we did it, I think we had reliable data for 1 season. So that's another reason that we started using announced attendance. I think Tampa had more years of reliable data, so they focused more on their internal data, which we're able to do now, but at the time when this all started, we had to use this data. And I'm doing the presentation with this data because I think the data is a little more interesting, and there's an interesting visualization that we can look at here. So here's the visualization, and it's a huge mess. So before we spend too much time on this, let's zoom in on the lower left-hand corner. And just to explain what's going on here, across the bottom is date, and across the vertical axis is attendance. And each dot is a game at this team's arena. So this team's the home team. And so like this dot right here occurred sometime, probably like this is January 1st, 2010 right here. So this is probably December 2009, and there was maybe 14,000 people as the announced attendance for that game. And so this is the part of the talk where I can't help myself. I can't, like, I was a professor for many years, and then a teaching assistant for many years before that. And I can't help but just try to get some audience class participation. So what I'm going to do now is ask you, what do you learn from the data by looking at this visualization? It's one of my favorite visualizations I ever made, actually, because I thought there was so much information. I knew nothing about this problem before starting it. I thought I learned a lot of information about a lot about the data from looking at this, and I was also very happy because it was the first time I ever used Facet Grid and the ggplot2 package. But what do you think you can learn from this? Yeah.
That a whole lot of New Yorkers have moved to Florida
Okay, why is that?
because of the Rangers' attendance being so consistent.
Oh, this is for Rangers home games.
Oh, home games.
Yeah. So these attendance numbers are for the home games at these teams' arenas.
All right. Never mind.
Yeah. We'll see that later though. That will come up later anyway. So it's still true. Okay. Could you be more precise with that statement? in technical terms, could you put that in more technical terms?
Yeah, they had a hard time filling the arena with more variability.
Okay, all right, so there's a lot of variability here, not so much here. So that's one obvious difference, yes?
You got a lot of right censorship.
And explain.
That there are lots of places where the attendance is artificially being limited by the fact that the building is only so big.
Okay, all right.
You could, like, you're not gonna measure draw quite what you want for that reason.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and so there's like a max, or at least some teams have a max. Some teams seems like they haven't had a max, but then they started being able to go over that max for some reason.
Did Tampa Bay change the size of their arena?
St. Louis did, I think.
They might just be counting standing room only tickets differently or something like that. We're not really sure.
Yeah.
You know, we would know unless we talked to those teams and found out what they were doing during that time or something like that.
So we actually lowered the capacity, we took the seats out.
Okay, there you go.
There you go.
I guess we can talk to the team, actually. I forgot. I don't know why I didn't think of that. All right, what else? Yeah.
Ranger tickets are underpriced.
Okay. So I could tell you something like that. If you're constantly selling out, one argument could be your prices are too low. But you might have other reasons for wanting to sell out also.
The Rangers arena was under construction in 2013.
Yeah, so this little dip here is when there was construction at MSG. And even this level is slightly below this level, I think. So the capacity might have gone down a little bit. Yeah.
You can tell when the lightning graphics Steven Stamkos.
Okay, you can tell when the lightning graphics Steven Stamkos. Yeah, it seems like team performance might have an effect on attendance, at least for some of these teams, like the smaller market teams. Yes?
But well, I guess this is only like 4 teams, but most teams don't have a consistent drawing.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, at least for these 4 teams, yeah. We'll see more teams that have a consistent draw in the next one, but there's still at least half the league that doesn't. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
For the teams that are inconsistent, there seems to be the degree of change year over year isn't huge. Like there seems to be a pattern to it, even though it's not really obvious what's driving it. Like for some, it might be talent of the team. It could be other things around like ownership and budgeting, things like that. But like it seems like there's relatively smooth variation.
Okay. Yeah. And part of that might be because there's a lag. I would say there's sort of a lag in how much interest there is in a team. Yeah.
St. Louis appears to have one season, 2011, 2012, that's much more consistent than the rest. That kind of looks like an anomaly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of confused me a little because I think they were good back then, but then they were still kind of like a contender here too. So, you know, maybe they had maybe they had a change in business strategy. You know, who knows? What's that?
Buying Elliott side for a couple years and then no one wants to come watch the games.
Oh, maybe. There's a hand, yeah.
You can see some pretty obvious, like, I don't know if it's like weather events or something, but for like the Islanders and Rangers, there's dots where they had 1 or 2 games where not a lot.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know what the reason for these dots were, but you mentioned weather. So I noticed that 2 of these dots, so the first time I went through the model, at the end I checked what are the, which games did we do worse on? And we had like a huge over prediction by like 7,000 people on a few games, and 2 of like the top 5 were both in the New York area on the same day. So then I Googled that date and it said the blizzard of 2000 whatever, right? So it was a blizzard. So yeah, so blizzard. Anything else? I think we got a lot of it. So let's go back to the big figure and just see if you have any more observations. You see a lot of the, we saw with New York, there's flat attendance. For a lot of the Canadian teams, there's flat attendance, and the bigger market U.S. teams, there's flat attendance. You can see when Atlanta to Winnipeg happens. Small markets, we saw with Tampa attendance going up. I thought Nashville was kind of interesting. I mean, forget about the fact that they made the cup last year. You expected that anyway, right? At least what I know of how they run their business and how they run their hockey team, I would say that they've been gradually going up over the past many years. Yeah.
Chicago remained pretty consistent except for 2008.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder what that, when were Kane and Tays were drafted? Yeah,
They were drafted following that.
Yeah.
It's the local television black and white.
What's that?
They used to black and white locally, so you can see it on TV, and that increased that.
Oh, okay.
It feels like a main audience.
Oh, okay. It's interesting. I didn't actually know that. Yeah. Micah.
You could, now that I really understand it, I want to change the color scheme from just showing me contrast to showing me ticket prices.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have that information.
All right.
So otherwise, I mean, that's a limitation of what we're talking about in this whole talk is we don't know ticket prices. Yeah, so.
See when Edmonton got me
I think that's a new arena.
Oh, is that not?
Yeah.
Other than Ottawa, we don't have any is what I was.
What happened to Winnipeg?
They went from Atlanta to Winnipeg.
We're gonna say Buffalo stinks, but we still support that.
Royal, that's what I was gonna say.
But it definitely looks like winning matters, like Boston, LA, Nashville, maybe Washington, Tampa Bay.
New Jersey's the one that doesn't change. They were still winning and they went to the Stanley Cup Finals, but their attendance is still super spotty.
Yeah.
We could also see that Sharks fans are surprisingly into hockey for being in California. So good for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say that the amount of variability in Florida really makes a lot of sense why I put so much effort into this.
I mean, this kind of stuff matters more to us and other small market teams than it does to someone else. Although, as someone else pointed out, maybe if they raise their ticket prices, then they would have more variability. Sam.
It looks like there's less variability later in the season.
Why do you think that is? So you're saying maybe like it's kind of hard to see. I'm surprised you actually noticed that, but I guess that's why they pay the big bucks and you get rings and stuff like that. But like, yeah, maybe if we just look at this little clump of dots here, there's more variability. It's hard to say steady. It's more variability on the left side than there is on the right side. Why? Yeah, and like sort of not as many people care in October as they do in April.
It's not football season.
It's not football season.
Like Dallas, Columbus, they go through the same thing.
Okay. But yeah, so there's kind of like, it almost looks like some of these are kind of going up, or at least the bottom is going diagonally up.
But the interesting thing, it feels like more of them seem to be going up. I would sort of expect them to be going down as teams were totally.
Yeah. Yeah, very, yeah. I mean,
there's a little bit of it, but not as many as I would have expected.
Maybe that's because many teams are still in the playoffs until the very end. Yeah.
So to directly comment on that, if we were able to see the ticket price variability as a color, a lot of teams, as they're losing, as they're eliminated, they start to drop their ticket price, and it's a lot easier for.
Yeah.
If I were in Ottawa, I would be very concerned about the variability last year. They had Eric Carlson.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a strange one.
But it does be right if it goes for the season.
That is true.
Was there some sort of event?
Yeah.
Back to the point about the inclining as the season goes on, it looks like a number of the, in earlier years, declined when they were lousy, but with that false parity we were just discussing, it inclines more. So Ottawa is a good example. In their earlier years, there's a decline as the season continues.
This one?
But now, regardless of the season, there's an incline in the season because more teams think they're still in the playoffs.
Yep. Like
Across the board, it seems to be.
What's interesting is that
although the Kings missed the playoffs in 2015 and 2017, their attendance remained pretty consistent. So
That's because their fans knew that their core seed was higher that year. It was, yeah.
Just got a quick question. Did you take into account the location of the arena?
No, like geographical, like away from a city or something?
Like basically how far from the city center? Because I know that that's a major issue in Ottawa.
Yeah, no, we did not. We've done some analysis on the location of our arena, because we're kind of a little bit west of Fort Lauderdale. But all right, I think we should probably move on. How much time do I have, or am I out of time?
I'll just wait.
Okay. I'll move quickly. So we already made a bunch of these observations. So we looked at teams that were similar to us. For the model, we looked at teams that were similar to us, and that small market teams. We removed blizzards. Remove European games because some of the earlier seasons had like first couple games in Europe, and so we built a model using a bunch of predictors, like ones we just talked about. And I'll go quickly through these: home team, away team, day of the week. We didn't really talk about a whole lot, but Saturday should be different than a Tuesday. Month, holidays. We really were interested in Thanksgiving week and then the week between Christmas and New Year's because there's a huge spike in attendance down in Florida, especially because people will come down on vacation for their winter holiday. Season openers, division rival, conference rival, points during the previous year, because there's sort of a lag in interest in the team, year-to-date points, and some other stuff. So we used a regression model, and just quickly, it just told us the impact that each of these variables have on attendance, independent of all the other variables. And so that's important because, if you just take average attendance on Saturday or something, well, maybe that teams try to play, or the league tries to stack good matchups on Saturdays for like Saturday night, Hockey Night in Canada, or just they try to do it in general. So we don't want to overstate the effect that day has by ignoring all the other factors that might affect attendance. So anyway, let's move past. And so here are some of the results. So this is these are the results for day of the week. And so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, not too good. The best are definitely Friday and Saturday, and followed by that, Thursday and Sunday. So not something that we didn't know, but at least we have a way to quantify that now. And we have a way to quantify that along with everything else. So here's the result for month. There is a monotone increasing relationship between month and attendance. It's been a while since I used that term. All right, so October minus 1,000, April plus 1,000. This one's kind of interesting. This is the opponent that's coming into town. So this goes back to the New York Rangers. It's kind of interesting because 6 of the top 7 teams, you might not be able to see them, but they're the original 6 teams. Detroit, New York, not Pittsburgh, Boston, Chicago, Montreal, Toronto. Pittsburgh's the only one in there that's not an original 6 team, but they have Crosby and Malkin and have won some cups and stuff like that. And then the next 2 teams are Philly and Washington, so bigger market U.S. teams that have popularity for one reason or another. And then this is another interesting one. So this is holiday. So it turns out it's December 22nd through 31st. Having games in there is good. Having a game on Halloween, not so good. Okay? But most holidays are actually good, probably because people have time off. The 2 holidays that aren't good are holidays where people already have some sort of like traditional plans to do that. So Halloween, trick-or-treating, or people in their 20s are going out and getting drunk in the city or something like that. Easter is the other one that has a big negative effect, and that's probably because people are going to church, having Easter brunch, things like that. There's a bunch of other ones that I couldn't fit on here, but St. Patrick's Day, there's a small uptick. Yeah. Sam.
Do you ever look at like the day before these days, like if kids have off school or
Good question. It's not in here, but for the Tuesday holidays, we did like Columbus Day -1 and things like that. I actually don't remember what the results were, but I think they were also positive. Yeah.
Do you have data, either you or Michael, with your teams on certain promotions and how effective those were at certain?
So ideally, so we do have that data. We haven't used that, at least in our model. I don't know if they have in theirs. But that would, yeah, how much you marketed a particular game should also, you would hope, impact attendance. If not, you should stop marketing. But I think that's actually something that we'll probably get into this year, actually. Yeah. And one cool thing about business analytics that it's harder to do in hockey analytics is that you can kind of design experiments in business analytics to sort of check how much does marketing a particular game matter. So you can't design experiments, well, maybe if you have, if your coach trusts you a lot, you can experiment on things on the ice or something like that. But normally I would say in hockey, you don't really have the ability to design experiments, but for sending out emails, you can kind of segment your population, send different emails out to different people and see what works best. So designing experiments in that way, you can actually do it a little bit easier on the business side.
Yeah. Actually, a quick follow-up to that. So did you look at maybe which players or coaches, if they changed teams, were more of a draw, let's say, than other players that changed teams? So,
no, that could be, that could certainly have an impact, but we did not look at anything that granular as far as like individual player stuff. It was really just venue. Yeah, basically, yeah. For the home team or for the team, it's just the venue, the home team and the away team were the only.
Yeah.
Well, that and the points. Those are like the two hockey variables. Right. So I think I'm probably out of time. So
yeah, we're gonna do a Q&A anyway. So
so I'm gonna yeah, I'll just end now.
Okay, so now we'll have a Q&A session with these folks.
Let's start with a couple for Matt and Alex, and then we can bump our Ryan a couple more. So where was we had one? Okay. Right there. Okay.
My question is for Matt. Tyler Dillon wrote a piece a couple weeks ago about how a team should just offer sheet Austin Matthews for the max contract and it would reset the salary cap structure. Is that something that your model could project? And if not, do you think that's something that would happen if that were to happen? It would reset it.
What do you mean by reset? Like
it would like normalize contracts back to like where these role players aren't getting the deals that they're getting now.
I don't know that the model can necessarily project that. It's ultimately when you go to project, let's say the next Austin Matthews, what the model is going to look at isn't just Austin Matthews' contract, but it's going to be all the rest of the contracts that are similar to Austin Matthews. Again, there's not really that many players, which is why you tend to see their value getting depressed a lot. You could look at perhaps weighting some of the more recent observations more in order to capture that, or to start throwing out some of those older contracts that aren't necessarily fair comparisons anymore. But it would be difficult. The model's still going to try to lean on as much information as it has. So we may know that all teams are going to give the max to those generational talents, but you can't really force the model to know that.
Another one for Matt. Have you ever considered and have you taken a look into whether draft position and draft round affects player salaries? And do you think that you might see any relationships there?
Yes, I have. I realized afterwards that I forgot to put that on the list of variables that are in the model. So the model also includes an impact for handedness, so particularly for defensemen, there's a bit of premium for right-handed defensemen, as well as variables for draft position and height and weight. Draft position, if I remember correctly, tends to have a bit more of an impact. One of the things that I'm looking at doing is separating out those early contracts, the contracts with players coming off of an entry-level deal, simply because I think you see a lot more of an impact of draft position there, where you're going perhaps more on reputation than necessarily on stats, and that would also help take care of some of those issues where you're signing a contract with only 2 years of data.
Question for Matt too. Do you have any way of looking at supply and demand for certain players? Like from year to year, you might have one offensive defenseman out there or one first line center where their contract, teams might overpay just because there's not a lot of supply out there.
I've been trying to think of a way to do that in a fair manner. One of the tricky things about that is that you need to find a good way to measure you need to have a good way to have, I guess, an initial guess of how good the market is to begin with. But your view of how good the market is going to be basically your projected salaries. So on the certainly the supply side, it's tricky. I think the demand side, you also need to know where teams are at, both in terms of their plans for next year. They may look like they have an empty contract slot that may say, oh great, there's $5 million of cap room there, but they may have a prospect they're looking to bring up and put in there. And then teams with internal caps are also going to mess that up a little bit. I think the other factor that I'm hopeful to include in the next version is looking at how far into free agency players sign, because there's a definite decrease, or my hypothesis is that there's a decrease as you go through the free agent period and as teams fill in more of those the gaps in their roster. There's perhaps not as much demand for players, and those players have to take a lesser offer than they would have if they signed July 1st.
There we go. Question for Brian. Did you look at winning and particularly clusters of winning versus attendance? One of the things that tends to show up in sports in general is if your team is on a streak, more and more people show up regardless of who they're playing. And then sort of in addition to that, when you're constructing a schedule for a given year, have you guys looked into the idea of, okay, we know these are teams that we tend to win against, so how about we cluster those series or those games such that we're more likely to get a winning streak and therefore get people to show up on a Tuesday?
So we have not looked at, we haven't looked at streaks, but I'm sure that it matters. We had in the 15-16 season, we had the 12-game win streak, and our attendance went way up after that. One thing I know Tampa has looked at is number of home games in a row. So like if you have a bunch of home games in a row, attendance might go down a little bit for each of those, because if you're a full season ticket holder, and it's a back-to-back game like Tuesday, Wednesday in the middle of the week, maybe you can't make it to both games just because of your schedule. Your schedule might not allow you to make it to both games. So slight decrease in attendance because of that. The second thing, we can make requests to the league. The league makes a schedule. We can make requests to them, but they don't have to honor those requests. And so we haven't really requested specific things other than, we request Montreal between Christmas and New Year's every year. We'll request specific things like that, but not necessarily like a bunch of certain teams in a row or anything like that.
All right. Hey, this is a question for Alex. I don't know if this was presented kind of at the very end of your presentation, but among the things that you were looking at or the data that Corey had, did it mention anything about the start of where the zone exit took place? Like behind the net, in the corners, or anything like that?
That's
It's a good question. We don't have a ton of that as far as I know. You know, that is, right now we just have the exit direction, which is more so what direction they were going in. And you can have some sense of that, but certainly not like behind the net versus at the dash or anything like that. You know, I do think this is why a lot of this transitional stuff is also going to be the foundation once we get tracking stuff and once we get microstats. This is stuff that is going to play into that, is going to be, we know these things, now what can we add into it with additional data like that? That would be super valuable to put together.
A question for Brian. When you try to determine whether you want the Panthers to face a good team on a weekend or a bad team on a weekday, what other factors do you take into consideration besides the other team's record?
Well, we use the results for day of the week for that. And so what did we do? I think we looked at, I actually don't remember what we did, but maybe we looked at the interaction term between team and day of the week, or I actually don't remember what I did. I skipped over that part, hadn't reviewed it in like a year. But the basic idea is we use the results of the regression to determine that, and we found nothing. We found no difference between putting a good team on a Tuesday and a bad team on a Saturday versus a bad team on a Tuesday and a good team on a Saturday in terms of attendance. But in terms of revenue, it's better to stack your good teams on the good days, it seems like, according to what at least our model says.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll do one more question.
Actually, just a quick question for you, Alex, and also something quick for Matt, too. Alex, when you put up the graphs about the passing player to player, what if there were two passes within the team coming out of the zone?
Yeah, so I need to get some more information for Corey on like the exact details of how that passing stuff works. In general, think of it as like a key pass out of the zone. So if it's literally the pass that crosses the line, or if it's one that's, you know, to the guy a foot away and then he takes it out, it's going to be that pass and not something like D to D within the zone would not be counted as that pass exit.
Got it, thanks. And then Matt, just quickly, did you factor in if players were eligible for arbitration or not when there are RFAs?
No, I didn't. I shouldn't say I don't have any way to get that in because I could have calculated it, but I didn't. I went with the minimal effort solution.
And we
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Brian. That's really good again. Thanks. Alrighty, so we have a couple non-hockey talks that we're going to have in our next session. First up is Devin Fuller?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, all right. He's the manager of analytics at Toronto Football Club. So this is going to be about the opposition analysis, forecasting style of play in soccer. And you want?
Yeah.
You want Anya or you want? Or we break out. Yeah.
I can walk on.
So what? Yeah. You said 4 times.
Can you hear me? All right. Cool. So, hey guys. So my name is Devin Pooler. I'm the manager of analytics at Toronto FC. I've been here. This is my third season right now. We've got our final game of the regular season tomorrow, which actually has me had me originally kind of worried if I was going to be able to make this or not. But it turns out we've had a pretty decent season, so tomorrow's game doesn't really matter that much in terms of regular season standings. So I'm happy to be here to be at RIT. If any of you caught me at Nessus, it's pretty much the same talk, unfortunately, but we'll hopefully that's not too many of you. And that's cool being here. Another school that I didn't get into. But Rochester actually has a pretty strangely big American soccer history. Like the Rochester Rhinos, big USL team here. They're been around for much longer than Toronto FC has, even though they play down a lower level. And they're the last non-high pro team to win the US Open Cup. Great story. And if you guys don't know, Rochester is the home of very arguably the greatest soccer player of all time. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you should be ashamed of yourself if you're a soccer fan. So
what if we're not a soccer fan?
What?
What if we're not a soccer fan? Do we just suffer in ignorance?
Well, that player would be Abby Wambach, which is very definitely one of the greatest American soccer players of all time, but also very arguably her impact of the game on the women's side was just outstanding.
Thank you.
So the inspiration of this talk, which is a hopefully upcoming paper with my other analytics guy, Toronto Brett, is that mostly all the work done in generally sports analytics, I think specifically soccer analytics, is kind of around the realm of match prediction. How good are teams, right? And how does that allow me to predict future results? Or like player evaluation. How valuable is this player, or how many wins is this player going to get me, if I sign this player or not. But there's really very little in terms of tactics. And as having a kind of a playing and a coaching background and a computer science background, I very much, this is very important to me. And this is something that I do kind of on a daily basis. I work very closely with our coaching staff in terms of opposition analysis and things like that. So how do I go to the next page here? Animations like that. So we need to figure out how to find data-driven tactical insight, right? So over my experience here so far, I've found that there's this kind of interesting trade-off in kind of applied sports analytics between like a sophisticated and predictive model versus a more simple and more useful model, right? Generally, the more sophisticated model gets, the more predictive it gets, and it might be really useful kind of from an academic angle of like predicting the future. But when you sometimes get into the sporting organization where you actually have to make this in a much more applied insight, you're going to get a lot more mileage when those models are maybe a little more simple, right? If I'm able to explain why this model behaves in the way it is, it's going to get bought into much quicker. So it's an interesting kind of trade-off that I found. That it's kind of convenient for me to find that, given I'm not really an academic, right? I can't understand most of the math slides that go up in conferences like this, right? But generally, the major takeaway on that side is we need to build kind of socially scalable models inside of soccer clubs, sporting organizations. And I frequently say that I do just as much kind of social engineering as I do technical engineering, right? Which is kind of funny takeaway. But to kind of give you an idea of what the data that we're dealing with here is, it's XY coordinates for each pass, right? So this data is provided by Office Sports, which was mentioned earlier today, funny enough, who is also a past employer of mine, so I should probably mention that. And they're nice enough to provide an anonymized season of data for us. So this is about We've got about 1,000 passes per game, and that scales to a couple 100,000 passes per season, right? On every single one of those passes, we have a various kind of coordinate components that go into that pass, whether it's the raw like X and Y coordinates or some metadata calculations that we make on it, like change in X and Y, distance of that pass, pass angle to goal, and a couple other kind of geometric things that we can do with that. And what are kind of the basis of this this talk and this piece of analysis is actually very simple, and it fits into just a couple lines of code. It's actually a pretty simple k-means clustering of these hundreds of thousands of passes, right? As you see here in the kind of Python pseudocode here, I picked 50 clusters, which admittedly is fairly arbitrary. There are, I'm sure, more kind of mathematically inclined ways to go about picking that number. But in terms of, as I've gone through and looked at and evaluated the results of this, I found that 50 was a pretty decent approximation of kind of the right balance of kind of usefulness, I suppose. So here is an example cluster, right? So on every single chart that I'm going to show you here is we're going to be attacking from the left to the right. So whether you're on either side of the field, it's normalized. And this shows does a pretty good job at picking out passes. What am I saying? Picking up passes from like your own penalty area out to the left side. So this could frequently be a goalkeeper to a left back, a center back to a left midfielder, or something something along those lines, right? And it's doing a decent job. All these passes look relatively similar. Another thing to note here too is the red passes versus the blue passes are incomplete versus completed passes as determined by the analysts collecting the information. And just to kind of show you how this kind of scales across some more clusters here in the 50, here's a quick kind of animated GIF of 10 or so different clusters. So it does actually a pretty good job at segmenting different types of passes, right? You can see crosses down, from the corner into the box. You can see long balls up through the middle. You can see all kinds of different passes that you'll see in a regular soccer game, right? And this is, that's cool. This shows us that, we're finding different types of passes. But what makes this really cool for me, I think, is this next slide where we actually start to see, so these are the 50 clusters and the average positions of each of them. What's really cool about this, k-means clustering is a completely unsupervised algorithm, and it's finding really actually pretty fascinating cluster symmetry, right? There's nothing in this algorithm that makes this approach find similar passes on either side of the field, but they exist. I'm only highlighting a few here, but if you look closer, you can find that pretty much every single pass on one side of the field has a matching pass on the right side of the field. There are a couple in there that are hidden that do not have kind of are either actually right down the middle or don't, but there are a few that don't have them. Maybe I should use 49 or 51 clusters or something to find that extra cluster, but it is really pretty neat that you're finding this underlying symmetry, this kind of tactical fingerprints of the game with such an unsupervised learning algorithm. So how do we make this more useful, right? So this is pretty, but not that useful. So if we start to look at team by team passing frequency by cluster, so I've truncated this to 15 or so columns or so. So there should be 50 of those, and I've sorted the clusters by total volume. And what you'll see is you do see some variation from team to team in terms of the passes per game of each cluster type, right? So certain teams attempt some certain passes more frequently than others. I think that's fairly interesting. Now, while it does a pretty good job at segmenting and showing you the differences between different teams, how predictive is this? If I know how a team is behaving in the past, how likely is that to correlate to how they're going to behave in the future, right? So we kind of take a fairly crude approach to this to show that it's okay. So we start by looking at the first 5 games of the season, looking at a team's breakdown of that previous matrix, and you see how that predicts the remaining games, right? As you go to 6 to the remaining rest and 7 to the rest, right? And you see over the course of the season, using, I'm going to move kind of quick here, but just using a mean absolute percentage, which was used earlier today too, in terms of just evaluating some model predictiveness, is that you do see that a team's previous past clustering breakdown correlates more closely to their future than, say, the league average does. So knowing these particular things about a team is fairly useful. It's, tactical analysis, opposition analysis isn't necessarily about figuring out how a team behaves in general. It's actually more interesting and much more scalable when you say, oh, how is this team different from the league average, right? Pretty much what this shows is that, yes, teams are fairly unique. And the reason why it tails off at the end of the season here is just because of the sample size kind of reduces at the end of the season. You only predict in 2 or 3 games. So then, how do we use this on the team side, right? So one very easy way is team similarity, right? So we can take a look at, and this is just a simple kind of Pearson correlation matrix between each team and kind of that 50 by 1 vector of passing frequency. And you can find teams that are similar to each other. So for example, team, I'm going to read this guy again. Team O and Team P, I need a legend here, don't I? Team O and Team P are fairly similar, where like Team O and Team J are incredibly dissimilar, right? So if I'm a team and I'm looking to, I've only got a week worth of time to kind of do some optimization prep, knowing that this team plays really similar to this team, we already played that other team this season, that actually can really jumpstart our tactical analysis or opposition analysis as we kind of go through the week. But there are a lot of other ways to use this too. So I'm going to show you a couple examples in terms of some visualizations that I've built around this. So this is one particular team, and what I'm doing here is highlighting all the particular passing clusters that they attempt a higher than 2 standard deviations of per game, right? Now this, what's kind of interesting is, while this, clustering is great, it actually, it doesn't have any sort of understanding of how similar passes are kind of to each other. What you'll find here, when you look at it like this, there are some kind of spatial components that kind of correlate on a team-by-team basis, which is kind of fascinating. So this team, for example, loves long field switches of the ball from kind of the central or left side to the right wing. Why would that be? I don't know. Maybe they have a speedy right winger they want to catch, or maybe they have a defensive midfielder who likes hitting these types of balls, whether they're good at it or not. They are doing it frequently, right? Maybe this team, where you notice all the passes that they attempt, they're much shorter and they're much deeper into their own defensive half. This team, if I'm not mistaken, is the highest volume passing team in this league, right? This team likes to possess the ball, strangle the opponent of their own possession, and kind of use possession as almost a defending mechanism, right? And then there are, while we've gone through, these two were much more about this is a very direct soccer team, where this is a much more indirect approach. While this is great at kind of determining that, we can also kind of find symmetry and asymmetry in how teams behave on the field, right? So this particular team likes passes down the left wing, particularly in their defensive half. Why is that? I'm not completely sure, but if I'm going to go and start to do some video analysis on this team next week, and I know that they love to play the ball down this left wing, that's another thing for me to be looking at, right? And that's a really useful piece of information for the coaching staff. So that's kind of the general gist of this, but there are some very obvious next steps to where this research can go. And the obvious one is kind of chaining passes into sequences or possessions and kind of possession classification type stuff. So just to kind of give you a quick example, this passing chain of 3 passes, so that really small one really advanced on the bottom right side there, which is the upper right wing, is the first pass in the sequence. And this is the most common chain of 3 passes of all the clusters, right? So that's kind of cool, and coincidentally, the next highest frequency, chain of 3 passes was the same exact thing with the symmetrical passes on the opposite side, which was cool. Now you can look at all kinds of different things here, like you maybe find a team that has more passes of more possessions of a particular chain or things like that, which can be fairly useful, right? So you can look at, say, how efficient, this team's chances tend to have, come from possession or passing chains that look like this, or things like that, or they're more efficient at scoring goals when they're doing this or that. which is kind of cool. But then we can also use this, so if we plot these three passes in this passing chain into larger sequences, we're able to find and come up with different possessions that have these same attributes. So if I'm looking at, a ton of passes after passes after passes, it's really hard to kind of classify different types of possessions. But looking at it like this and kind of reducing the dimensionality of the whole thing, you can very quickly find relatively similar passes. So this is showing, the attacking team had the ball up in the top right, was able to move it back and switch the point of attack, right? That's a kind of a tactical motif you see fairly frequently, and by clustering in this way allows us to kind of quickly identify possessions of that type. So that's kind of where we are. Thank you. And I figure we'll give a break now, or thank you.
All right, so thank you, Devin. Next, we have Matt Hoffman, part of the School of Mathematics Sciences here at RIT. Devin and I talked to Matt earlier. He's going to have a chat with the admissions board about maybe retroactively accepting you, so he can give you an honorary degree or something. So anyways, Matthew is here to take credit for some of his students' work. And now, so we're going to go from soccer to tennis and applying multi-resolution stochastic modeling to individual tennis points with some data from.
I have right behind you. Oh, okay. Okay, so so I'm excited. So Ryan and I started a conference to talk about hockey analytics 3 years ago. This is the first time I'm talking, and let's talk about tennis. So as Ryan pointed out, Calvin Floyd was a master's student who graduated. So this is work that he did. He's now working for the Sacramento Kings. And Ernest Folkway is a professor in statistics here as well. So quickly, tennis analytics is sort of interesting, right? You normally hear baseball is developed really first because it's really an individual sport, right? Tennis actually is an individual sport. And there really hasn't been as much by way of analytics in tennis. There's a few reasons for that. One is sort of a lack of incentives, right? You don't have owners creating teams and general managers. They're not looking for that kind of edge in the same way. And that has led to the battery to die on us. And the other thing that you see is, that says a lot to it. And the other thing is just data availability. A lot of the focus is on tally statistics, winners, serve percentage, things like that. And there's a lot of effort actually for TV broadcasts to make them more interesting and enlightening. But we were fortunate to be able to get our hands on some data. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of this, right? The data is there. I'm going to talk to you about a data set from the 2015 US Open. So this is spatiotemporal data, temporal resolution of a 25th of a second, spatial resolution of about a millimeter or so. We have spin, we've got speed. The spatial is 3D, so you have all that information as well. Again, this comes from some technology that will remain nameless, but is used for assisting umpires to make calls. So I'm going to talk about two data sets in particular. Unfortunately, these are not public. However, let me make a pitch that if there are any RIT students here who are interested in doing work on this, come talk to me because they need data sets. And we have them. So we've got two sets. One, we actually were given the data to 5 matches. It's at 6 players and 4,400 or so shots. We were also able to run Python scripts on the USTA's library, so that's for the 2015 Open, so that's 70 matches, 73 players, and over 70,000 shots. Okay, and so the goal for this was to try to create some sort of metric to actually track a point, right? To actually use stochastic modeling to make this feasible, but try to identify important shots within a point. The student was sort of inspired by the basketball, right? He originally wanted to do his thesis on basketball, but we were able to get tennis data. So he was sort of working on this expected possession value idea from basketball. Okay, so in order to actually deal with this data, the first thing we wanted to do is segment it into different regions, because the idea being the player locations is sort of one of the important factors in deciding what shot happens next. So this is a plot of the locations of the position of the player striking the ball for of all the ground strokes in the data set that we have. As you can see, most of these are ground strokes from the baseline, but sort of, and so these are the locations of where the returner is for those shots. And so to start to course in this data, we divided up the court into 18 regions on each side. So because there was so much data along the baselines, you can see there's slightly finer resolution along the baselines, and then you've got net positions. Obviously, there's not a lot of shots that happen from like box 8, for example, box 4. But at least we have slightly finer resolution there along the baseline. And as I said, one of the goals here was that the location of the players would be one of the important factors. So we are denoting these by the location, right, of both the person striking the ball, but also where the opponent is. Okay, so we call this the player location combination. And just to show you, right, if I say 610, that means the person striking the ball is in box 6. The person returning the ball is in box 10. And in addition, right, so that covers 18 positions for striker, 18 positions for returner on the ground strokes, and then we add additional bins for first serve, second serve, and the corresponding returns. And so that's sort of the total set of all of the locations that we are considering when we're coursing the data. Now, the goal here is to take a look at the impact of particular shots, right? So we want to come up with weight for each shot. And when trying to figure out how to do this, the sort of straightforward thing is, well, if you win the point, you get a 1. If you lose the point, you get a 0 with the shot, right? We wanted to be a bit more in depth with that. And in addition, we did think that while pure winners are sort of always measured, there is an importance in tennis to setting up the next shot, right? So that the shot that actually wins the point is often set up, right, by an important shot. In addition to, while a shot might not be a winner directly, it might not really be returnable, right? Someone might be good enough to get a racket on it, but they're not actually going to be able to return it into play. And so we want to be able to give some significance to those. And so we came up with the following situations and weights: person striking the ball. So obviously if they hit a winner, that's 1. If they hit the ball into the net or out of bounds, that's 0. If it's not impactful, by which we mean the point is not over within the next shot, we give it a 0.5. And then we've got weights of 3/4 and 1/4, depending on whether, right, a quarter if your shot leads to the other person ending the point in their favor, and 3/4 if your shot leads to you ending the point next time in your favor. I'll say now those weights particularly the 3/4 and 1/4 numbers, we just decided to use because it seemed like a good place to start. Now, we want to take a look not just from the perspective of striking the ball, but also from the perspective of returning. So we've got similar weights for the return position as well, right? So we're distinguishing between whether you're striking or returning, but we've got weights for both scenarios. And as you can see, these largely mirror the weights that I showed for the strike states. Okay, and so the idea here, and again, inspired by the basketball work that's been done, was to do this multi-resolution approach and have this Markov chain model. And so we basically divided up into, in this case, there's sort of two main states. You're either hitting the ball or you're receiving the ball, right? And most of the time, you're transitioning back and forth between these states, and you'll occasionally transition into an end state, right? Where the point ends, either in your favor or your opponent's favor, right? So we need sort of transition properties for all of these things, and in addition, we need to have sort of values or weights with which we attribute to each of these. A couple of the things that we defined quickly, without going too much in depth, we created Markov transition matrices, and then these are weights. So this is a strike win rate. The idea being looking at the particular state of the point, right? Locations of the players. We then just took a look at and weighted them by the values, right, that I just showed. We basically just took a look at what the expected value was, right? How much a given strike should have contributed to a one point. And again, these are for a player, right? So you compute this for an individual player, and then try to see how that player performs from different locations. And you can also compare players between themselves based on these. There's a similar value for the returns, right? So this would measure a player's returnability and how many points, right? What the contribution is to a 1 point based on different locations that the returner is and where the ball that they're returning was struck from. Okay? And then those are combined into an expected shot win rate, right, which is just this expectation value. And here you can see, right, we constructed a Markov transition probability matrix between these states. And so when doing the expected value, if you're the server, right, you're in the top line, and you're taking a look at the transition to the next step, where you're the returner, and what the return win rates are, and also what the likelihood of transitioning to an end state is, and then the values there. In the bottom line, if you're the returner, right, you've got the next step where you would be striking the ball with the corresponding Markov transition probabilities from your opponent, right, and then the probability of transitioning to an end of point and the values associated with it. Okay, and so that's the idea. And so let me just show you what it looks like applied to an individual point, right? Those of you who looked at basketball things before, we've talked about the inspiration, and so part of the goal was creating figures like this, where this is 1 point of the US Open, and you can see this is from the perspective of the server, right? So you see a second serve hit initially, right, and then returned, and then you can see a little bit of back and forth play, right? 12 and 13 are both locations on the baseline. So these are strikes back and forth from the baseline until about 6 seconds in, player 2, right, who's returning, hits a nice shot from the 12-12 location. Now 17 is farther back, so this pushes player 1 back. Player 2 is able to move in towards the net. That's the 17-7. And so you get a return from 17-7, but the probability of winning from that point is pretty low. And the returner is able to finish the point on the next shot. This is the same point from the perspective of the returner. So again, you see the second serve return. You see the baseline, right, shot, and then you see, in this case, player 2 hitting a shot which puts themselves at a very high expected shot win rate, and is able to finish the point from 313. I want to point out again here, this is the previous slide, but the text at the top, right, points out that you've got 2 instances of 1312, right? But because it's taking into account multiple time steps, they have slightly different expected shot win rates, right? Because you do have some memory from the system. Okay. And so this is the kind of picture that we can create, right, to identify key shots in terms of how important a shot was, right? How much it changed the likelihood of winning points. Now, this is sort of one measure. We're working on validation now, still. So here's a couple quick things that we've done so far. First of all, the ESRW is based on the shot and return win rates. So one thing we looked at was, well, can you tell between players, right? Do players who did better in the tournament have better strike win rates? And so we compared players, right, the shot win rates from players who, right, lost in their first match, right, won their first match, won 2 matches, won 3 matches, won 4 matches. Okay? The idea being, you would expect that players who stayed in the tournament longer probably were playing better. So you can see that there is, from the means, there's certainly a lot of noise in there. Right, there is a decent amount of variability. There is some trend in the mean that there actually seems to be an improvement there. The better players who are doing better had better strike win rates. The return win rates were a little bit less conclusive. There didn't seem to be quite the trend in those. And one last validation picture that was created recently. One thing we did do was say we've got 5 matches, right? So these are all sort of dependent, right? Training on data and then testing on the data. So we also took that 5 match sample and trained on 2 matches each from 2 different players, and then tested it on a 3rd match, right, between those 2 players. And so this is a fit with the expected shot win rate on the bottom, the actual win percentage of the points from the independent data on the vertical. And so from this, I don't know, it looks to me like a couple things. One, I think it's a decent fit, but I do think that those points here indicate that our weights are not really optimal for these 3/4, 1/4 points, right? So there probably needs to be some tuning. In particular, I think we probably are giving too much credit to a player for when their opponent hits it out, or when they get a winner on the following point. So I think those appear to need some updating. I think that's sort of a general idea of what we've been working on. I think the initial results indicate that this is somewhat reasonable, and they give you a different way to tell the story of a point rather than just summarizing that point as, say, a winner or an unforced error. Obviously, we need to do more validation and update the weights. We've been discussing learning the weights from the data. We've also done some preliminary work in clustering all of the shots into different types of shots as a way to include that information into the system as well, right? Because we do have spin, speed, things like that in addition to just location. So we're sort of getting started with this, but this is sort of what we've done up to this point. As I said, this was Calvin Floyd's thesis. If you want to take a look at the full details, the thesis is available online. Again, I do want to thank the U.S. Tennis Association for letting us use this data. And thank you guys for listening.
man.
Not that bad.
All right, so next up we have a hockey talk. So Chris Watkins is here. He didn't send a bio in, but I can tell you that he's very committed to this conference because he took a bus all the way from New York at midnight. So buy Chris a drink after this.
I will go to sleep at the bar immediately. Hi, everyone. So this week in pseudoscience, we're going to look at how to optimize line usage with play-by-play data. I will sort of apologize in advance. You'll see why in a second. So let's talk basketball, actually. Here's Rudy Gobert. He's a very tall individual, 7'3", with a 7'9" wingspan. Actually, one of the longest wingspans ever recorded in the NBA Combine. Was first in defensive rating last year, which basically is a measure of how many points the team allows per 100 possessions, and then second in defensive player of the year voting. So very good defensive player. But let's see if I get this to play. Not, I will illustrate it for you. Okay, might take a little bit to load. Anyways, okay. I'll play it out for you. Anyways, Rudy Gobert is a very long player. He happened to be out guarding Steph Curry, very far away from the basket, which is not his comfort zone. Steph Curry did his little dance move thing, and Rudy Gobert thought he was going one way, spun around, realized Steph Curry was the other way, spun around again, and by the time he realized what was happening, Curry had already scored and was down the court celebrating. Not a good look for him. So, how can you beat that? I wish you could saw the video. It made a lot more sense. The reason why I illustrate that is while Rudy Gobert is an amazing defensive player, against a player like Steph Curry, his defensive talents are not utilized quite to the best extent. So Daryl Morey, who's the GM of the Houston Rockets, probably one of the top GMs in all of professional sports, went out and acquired Chris Paul, a future Hall of Fame point guard, over the summer. He also acquired some marginal bit parts, Luke Mute and PJ Tucker, who are not star players by any measure. However, in the first game of the season against the Warriors, Steph Curry's team, Chris Paul was actually not playing in the fourth quarter. Instead, the coach of the Houston Rockets, Mike D'Antoni, went with these two players on the court, and they actually ended up beating the Golden State Warriors. If anyone pays attention to basketball, that is no small feat. And the reason why they were able to do that is because while these players are nowhere near, probably even combined, nowhere near as impactful as Chris Paul, their particular playing styles really did very well against how the Warriors play in particular. The Warriors are long and have a lot of shooters. These guys contribute from a defensive impact that they are long as well and also can shoot three-pointers, and that's really all that they need to do. Once again, I probably won't be able to get this video up, but this is the video of Connor McDavid undressing Duncan Keith in front of a national audience the other night. It hurts my soul because I love Duncan Keith, but Father Time was undefeated. With that context, Steph Curry, like player, and Connor McDavid, elite playmaker, probably the fastest skater in the league with the puck, and ridiculous ability to process and make decisions. Against a defenseman who doesn't have the foot speed to keep up with them, he's going to make them look silly. So how do you sort of try to counteract that? So basically what I wanted to do was try to figure out if there's a way for lines with star players like Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin. Was there a way to identify a particular combination of players that may be better against them than what you expect given their talent level? So the first thing I did was parse a bunch of data from CourseGood.hockey. Thank you, base guy, Emmanuel. And then I looked to identify 7 key categories for those particular players. So shooting, passing, skating, physicality, shot creation, transition play, two-way playing / defense, and sort of get into why I picked those particular categories. So the methodology I used basically I just look at the league's top players. So Patrick Kane, Nikita Kucherov, Jamie Benn, so on and so forth. And specifically ones that have different playing styles. So for example, for Patrick Kane, I use a K means cluster analysis to figure this out. For someone like Patrick Kane, when I was looking at the data, it was actually really easy to find his cluster. All I really had to do was find people with high assist rates and rushes, and then people that never hit anybody at all. And basically the cluster that came out was him, Artemi Panarin, and Johnny Gaudreau. That was the only people in the cluster. And that was actually pretty easy to find. The other ones were a little bit more difficult, but basically that's how I broke it down. So found the star players, found the traits that were common between those particular clusters, and use that to identify the skills I wanted to parse out. Once I did that, I then looked at the play-by-play data that I pulled from Corsica, and then started to just really like mix and match various things together to identify if any of them were predictive of these particular skill sets. So for example, for skating ability, I looked at something like rushes and rebounds and all that stuff. Those actually weren't by themselves very predictive, but when I looked at something like penalties drawn plus rush shots per 60, I saw that those particular players like Connor McDavid and Taylor Hall and so on and so forth stood out really in those areas. So I was like, okay, this is a good proxy for skating. Did the same thing for Mike had talked about it earlier, on ice usage rate, which is basically what percentage of the shots taken are taken by a certain player when they're on ice. Ovechkin, as you would think, is very high in that area. Another one is transition play, and so this one was actually kind of interesting. It wasn't one I thought about originally, but when I looked at players like Nicholas Jarmanson and Mark-Edouard Vlasic, I saw that they really scored well in this thing I looked at, which is they had high defensive zone starts, but also high Corsi for relative. And so I found that was actually a good proxy for transition play, and specifically used. What I did was actually parse Corey Slander's data for zone X's, the one that Alex was talking about earlier. I parsed that and actually looked at those variables against it and saw some pretty good predictability in that. So that's how it sort of landed on that metric. So, for example, here's a list of players who are like the top shot creators in the league. The reason why I chose this metric in particular, I didn't think it actually had any really relevance to hockey. That's my basketball coming out. One of the big consternations about acquiring star players in basketball is there's only one ball to go around. If you have a whole bunch of guys that need the ball in their hands, that sort of reduces the overall impact of them. So one of the things I wanted to look at is that it does that hold weight in hockey as well. So I looked at the top shot creators based on the metrics I looked at. You see, the list sort of makes sense. Austin Matthews, Dustin Buckland, Ovechkin is maybe not on this list, but not too far off of this. So one of the things I wanted to make sure I wasn't doing was just sort of looking at a bunch of the same metrics in different ways. And I won't say there is some overlap between these. I won't deny that, but I did feel pretty comfortable that there were enough of an explanation of true actual hockey skill without just sort of reiterating the same stats over and over again. So then I looked at, okay, I sort of felt comfortable with the players that I was spitting out. Does it actually correlate to anything, specifically to itself, and then to actual measures of performance? So first I looked at year-over-year correlations. Some of them came out better than others. Specifically, the transition one is low. The reason for, why that is because I got lazy. And when you actually look at zone exits and zone entries, those are actually two different skill sets. I lumped them in together because I just didn't feel like it was a lot of data I was looking at after a while. I was like, okay, it's fine. So that probably would be a little bit higher. But as I said, the year-over-year correlations actually came out pretty well. And then I actually correlated it to Dom's Chicken's game score. So that came out pretty well. And then I looked at relative Corsi 4. And one of the reasons I even started this experiment is because oftentimes when I hear players, so-and-so has a great Corsi or so-and-so has a great Corsi 4. I have no idea why they have that. It's just sort of explain that this person is good at this and there's no explanation as to what they're doing in particular that's different from another player on the team. that sort of leads to that. So that was sort of the incentive of looking at this. And so you can see like skating, for example, correlates very high to both of these measures. So I thought that was pretty interesting for a stat that I didn't really think would have a lot of predictive value going forward. So like I said, I looked at game score. I saw it came. I actually was very concerned that it had such a high correlation with game score. So it has an R squared of 0.87. But actually makes a little bit of sense. Dom's metric is based mainly off of box score stats as well. And so mine is as well. It's just a sort of different look at the data. So it wasn't too surprising when I thought about it. So back to the original question. How to beat Connor McDavid's line? You can't. From what I found in the data, this is one of the reasons I was so, it took me so long to actually get it up and running. I was, scratching my head like, oh, maybe I'm looking at this data wrong. And I was like, oh man, maybe Connor McDavid is actually just a really good player. Connor McDavid's lines relative to opponents. Whatever line he's on is significantly better than anybody he's faced against. I looked at a small sample of about a third of his 5-on-5 on ice shots last season, and saw that his line was 30% better at shooting than the average line they faced. So when I try to look at it and say like, okay, well, how can I predict the shot differential and see if there's ways to like bring it down? Is there a particular skill set that brings that down? No. One thing that sort of may, sort of looking at this, that may sort of help, I guess, other than just not going on the ice when he's there, is creating shots on your own and basically keeping the puck out of Connor's hands, which sort of makes intuitive sense. As I said, I don't know how predictive this is, and this is something I would like to go back to and actually hammer down more going forward if we're going to use it from a tactical perspective. So next steps. One of the things that I've done this for basketball before, and I actually did find, for example, if you have a bunch of playmakers on your team or a bunch of shooters around, the shooting percentage of the overall lineup goes up just by the presence of those shooters. I want to see the same thing sort of holds true in hockey. I want to see what those skill sets are in particular. As I said earlier, shot creators cancel each other out. And can you pair a weak transition player with a strong one? So one player, as you might not be surprised, that fared badly in the transition metric was Shea Weber. And we know that in the situations where he succeeded the most, he's had a player that's actually very strong in that metric, like Roman Josi. So is that something that a coach can sort of look at and understand how to pair and mix and match his lines? So same thing, lineup decisions. One of the things I'm intrigued by is if I can have a super fast fourth line out there that can sort of annoy the heck out of a first line, maybe that's better than sitting out my shut down second line and sort of wasting their performance. And then finally, using sort of K-means clustering or whatever analysis to identify free agents that fit a particular skill set or playing style, or finding a skill set that's undervalued in the market. So that's the presentation. I really wish I could show y'all that video set how to dance it.
All right, so thanks to all three of you. We're gonna set up over here. We'll do a little Q&A session here before we take our final break for this. So, yes.
Yeah, this is just a quick one for Matthew, which is your anonymous tennis tracking system Hawkeye, or have they updated? You can choose to not answer the question, which I would also take as an answer. Okay.
Any other non-accusatory questions?
It's online. It's listed online. That's the tennis tracker.
This question is for Devin. So what you're looking at was completed passes. Have you done any analysis, or do you plan to do any analysis on focusing on interrupted passes, where you're looking at kind of like where your most successful chance to disrupt the other team's possession is?
We definitely do some of that. What's annoying about incomplete passes, at least in this data set, is that you don't actually know who the intended recipient is. So for a lot of things that we do, while that isn't immediately relevant to what I was doing here, it's the reason why I don't use it quite as much. But you can learn a lot of things from incomplete passes. I think frequently you'll see after a game, like passing charts or things like that being tweeted or things like that. I feel like I learn a lot more when I look at the incomplete passes on the team versus when you look at the complete passes, because you'll learn a lot about where teams are making more risks, right? What are they trying to exploit? Where are they trying to? So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with incomplete passes.
So I guess this is to anyone who wants to answer it, but since the theme of this was kind of different sports that aren't hockey, how much do you guys, if at all, look at the things other sports are doing with analytics and what data they're analyzing and apply that to your sports, or do you just like look solely at other people in your sports?
All right, so I mean, I will start by saying that very clearly the work that we were doing on tennis was very motivated by work that had been done in basketball. So I would say when trying to figure out how to deal with that data, we really did look around at everything that was out there in other sports.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think that one of the conversations in hockey right now, or ice soccer, is expected goals, right? And I think very much that came out of soccer. So we're kind of waiting for hockey to give us something back. That'd be really great. If you guys can figure out how to do goalkeeping stuff, I would be very, very grateful. Well, we can barely do it with larger goals. I don't know, but yeah, a lot of the stuff that we're doing in the soccer space is very much inspired by basketball as well. I'm very jealous of their kind of data set. Their really high resolution tracking data is pretty awesome, and it's kind of expensive to install in stadiums for professional organizations that aren't quite have the television deals that the NBA does.
Quickly on that, like quickly, one of the things I was curious about was when I was thinking about that, and I was watching the Oilers Blackhawks game, and they were throwing Duncan Keith out against Common Game, and I was like, this isn't going to work. Like, Duncan Keith is 34, he doesn't have the foot speed anymore. Like, this is just not a good matchup for him. And so one of the things that you don't see in basketball as much is, oh, this guy's just a good defender. As I was trying to show in the video, just because he's good at defense doesn't mean he's good at defense against this particular player. And I don't see that quite as much in hockey. And so that was one of the thought processes behind the project, was saying okay, maybe this person may be, a third pairing defenseman, who's really fast or really good. He may not make the best decisions out of his own zone, but he's really good at shutting down this particular type of player. I'm going to put him out here inside whatever situation, just to sort of take the effect of that. So.
Devin, I actually have a quick question for you. When you looked at the clustering of the passes for all the different teams that you have the data on, do you, or beyond a simple more here's where they'll attempt to attack or build up from, here's their style, whether it's direct or more slow fast attack. Do you look at kind of weighting those different styles by expected goal values? Not only say, here's who's different and here's why, but also here's why so and so is more dangerous and why.
For sure. One, you can so if you take a look at each of those kind of clusters, you can see kind of the expected goals gained or lost in possessions that feature that particular pass. Obviously, passes that are closer to the goal are going to be, you're going to more likely create shots, therefore expected goals. But you also do find some other funny kind of things. There's what you also really use this for is estimating difficulty of passes, which is really helpful. And what you do find is that generally the difficulty of the pass correlates fairly strongly with the kind of expected goals gained on that possession. But there are some types of passes that you actually get a disproportionate amount of value gained versus the difficulty of the pass. Teams that create those or attempt those types of passes more frequently are better soccer teams. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do
This is directed at Matthew. In tennis, it seems like a lot of
whether a shot is going to be successful for you has to do with not just where you're hitting from and to, but how you got the returner to that spot. So if you are making a player run, you've got a better chance of winning that point
on the shot. Is there a way that you could break that down, maybe by expanding the definition of a state in your Markov matrix to be not just the current player combination, but something like an ordered tuple of the past three of them? Would you have enough data points to do that?
Right. So I think the question for us at that point is, will we have enough data points for that? I think that's a great suggestion, and sort of, with Devin, sort of with the, we've got the X, Y, Z coordinates, X, Y coordinates, so we can create velocity vectors, and we can look at distance traveled and things like that. So those are all things that we've sort of been discussing. I'm not sure. I think maybe I think we could probably get enough data to look at some of that. Yeah, it's just not something we've had a chance to do yet, but it's a great suggestion.
My question is for Matt also. Entirely because I noticed that both of the other presenters relied heavily on k-means, but you did not, and instead decided to segment. Is it wise? Is it even practical to instead try to identify the regions for that you put into your later model using a method like that?
Yeah, I think that's also an excellent suggestion and something that we discussed a bit. It would be, it was sort of ad hoc the way we drew the regions in that system, and you could certainly, probably learn a more reasonable setup. The question of whether it matters, I think if you did do some, this is something I was interested in, is whether if you did clustering sort of shot type and location type, maybe you could better identify an underlying structure in what was actually happening, right? That had a little more context from the point than just segmenting it that way. Now, I don't know whether, without actually doing it, I'm not sure whether the locations themselves need to be, and I'm not sure in my head whether this I believe, but I'm not sure whether it will really matter the locations, or really what you'll gain is adding things like shot type, spin, velocity, like the movement vector. I tend to think that probably it's a reasonable approximation, and you get a lot more out of adding those extra features than you would out of doing that. But I have zero proof for that.
My question is for Chris. I was wondering if you applied your hockey research at all to basketball, and what do you think of the Cavs team fit, given that they have a lot of high usage players such as Isaiah Thomas, D-Wade, and Derrick Rose?
So sort of as I alluded to earlier, actually, the original model was built in basketball. Specifically, I wrote my thesis in grad school around a NBA trade model. So if you've ever been on ESPN.com, they have a trade machine, which I never was really enamored with, because we just look at, as we talked about war metrics earlier, look at PER, which is one of the original one number metrics in the NBA, and just say like, oh, this person has a higher PER, it's a good trade, they're a better player. I never really bought into that. So one of the things I tried to look at was the hypothetical trade I proposed was Chris Paul in 2012 to Atlanta for Josh Smith and a bunch of draft picks. What would the effect of Atlanta's on-court performance be? Chris Paul is a great passer. How would that affect scoring of all the other teammates? So I had this sort of interaction effects sort of embedded in that. I didn't do that with this one because I just ran out of time. But it is something I've looked at previously. To your question about the Cavaliers, I think LeBron sort of cures all ills, as Connor David does in Edmonton. I think he is getting older, so I don't think it makes that much of a difference. But it's an intriguing team. I don't know if it's a good team, but Golden State's going to win forever and ever and ever anyway. So I don't think it matters all that much at the end of the day.
Okay. So thank you. Oh, was there one more? Okay. I was just up there, back. All right. Two questions for Devin. When it came to the passes that you were looking at, did you notice if there were any changes in how teams were lining up in their formations? And my second question is, based off of all the research that you've done for Toronto FC over the years, I was wondering if you calculate the probability of you becoming president of U.S. soccer.
Well, I haven't answered the first one. Sorry, what was the first one?
Just if the passes that you've been observing or
by like system, gotcha. Yeah, for sure. So, for example, we play a 3-5-2, which is relatively rare inside of our league, and there's definitely certain types of passes that we attempt more frequently, probably largely because of that. But I'm kind of okay with this kind of analysis finding that out, because like that, that is something that is unique to that team, right? So I'm cool with that, not necessarily adjusting for formation. But yeah, without a doubt, you'll see teams that play like a diamond midfield or something. You see a lot of those very short passes in the middle of fields, particularly inside and outside, will be usually glaring red. And as for U.S. soccer, man, it's been a rough couple weeks. I'm not sure if the hockey people understand, but it's yeah, I think that U.S. soccer doesn't need to burn the entire place down, but it's I think failing to make the World Cup is an issue of like 8 years in the past, not like necessarily right now. So we'll get there. Don't worry. Analytics, I think, will play a part.
Okay, so we're gonna take a quick final break. I'll come back like 10:15 for our last couple talks, all right?
No, I don't care. I don't care.
I want to do like that's not what you're asking. Like, have you done anything?
Also, I forgot to mention, Matt reminded me that there are cookies out there.
Okay, I'm gonna get a cookie and go grab tickets. Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. Okay. Yeah, it's, I like how. Yeah.
I was just like, I love their videos. That just
So the next thing was like, it's like, oh, I'm shopping online, right? So what's that? Like good or seriously, yeah. It's like that's the important thing for like Yeah.
So I meant which
That's
one?
Oh,
Which makes it-
or it gets something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember like, what was it, the Caps Maple Leaf series, like they were putting that third line against Ovechkin's line, and then freed up Matthews against the second line. Like, it was just so unique, and I'm like, I don't know if every team thinks this way.
Well, yeah, and
I mean, granted, it could be like, this is how the roster is, and you can take advantage of it. So it's just like getting into that thought process. It's like, hey, this guy can do something. This is
I hope you guys are.
Yeah.
Possible, and then we're gonna get our guy got there and school.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that so these guys are in their own zone. You get the fuck up to that zone, and that's our guy. Big shots. No, I'm not sure this is. But yeah, I'm excited. Stop on right about it. And go from there and then start integrating the field.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm like 40 minutes now. Oh. Yeah.
You can tell by how you dress. I didn't look up. Yeah, that deserves congratulations.
Oh, no, it's not that. Are you from the area?
No, but I'm very lucky to come to college at another school around here, and I still have some friends.
Okay, that's
why I
right.
was able to be like, okay, yeah, I'll
Okay. Yeah, no, I misunderstood the Rockets. So I thought Rockets was like next level or something like that. And also talks about 2 hours away from New York. Neither one of those things are true. I didn't find that out until like last month. Oh yeah, right there. I'm just like roll down the street, like that's fine. I was like, oh, I got it.
So did you fly to New York?
No. I live in New York.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
This morning, I moved on Friday.
Oh my goodness.
Or like long
Yeah.
So what about consistent?
No, this is fine. No, because I was wondering about what I was like, oh, there was obviously some work with savers, one of savers. Oh yeah, we just go down the street. Oh, Buffalo's on the floor. So about that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know what you got. Sure, here's what we can do. I can trade you, I'll trade you Keith. You give us Rana and
Yeah, I think first round. I'm literally like after
kick off the stuff.
Yeah, shoot, what is this? That's
I
just remember the term being long.
No, it sounds okay. I mean, it's in comparison to other 30-plus defensemen, it's like term salary is that bad. He's a B plus defenseman.
Right. Yeah.
And it's except unless Matt Niskanen is going to be out for the whole season, they don't have the money.
Well, so here's the other thing. Here's the other thing I want to take away from like that particular type of analysis is like, okay, because like even when they signed Shaq Kirk last year, like what Shaq Kirk was good at was things that they need help with.
But it was really like the power, like to improve the power play by like 2%, 3%.
That marginal difference in power play isn't as like, and I can make that trade 100 times and then give up.
I mean, even extent also. Yeah, like I definitely know when Shatner got traded, like everyone from Rangers Twitter was basically like, "Don't worry, he's coming to us in August or something."
Yeah. Like I said, you know how high he's again, it's all like trash. prospects and stuff.
Yeah, we definitely need prospects, but the thing is, like, we just have traded like so many, like not even like first round picks, but just picks period. Where like the margin of error to now like, and I just don't really trust. I really want to pick the leaderboard because like I definitely sense the Caps have changed the way they drafted since they changed GMs.
Oh, where it's not high, like,
yeah, but I've always felt like McClellan was like different from McPhee. Like he completely whether that's an upgrade or a downgrade, that's another.
Like I said, I saw him a couple weeks ago, and I still. Actually, I felt more vindicated now that they just got back to this because they're not going to make the playoffs. And now they're not going to make the playoffs, and they didn't get like as much in terms of prospects and picks as they could have gotten. And so like I told one of the athletes like 3-0, I'm like, keep the sadness index. They're going to be right there at the top. Where they're going to finish out of the top 5 picks and then not make the playoffs. Yes, this is exactly how you're going to start the franchise. Like,
I remember they do have a ton of draft picks though.
They do, but like they have some draft picks, so like they have them in the area where like the likelihood of being able to start. They have all kinds of like teams.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, never.
Yeah.
I miss this type of vocabulary.
Yeah,
pennies, nickels on the dollar.
They have a bunch of
trading
they have a bunch of scratch offs, tickets, like no like lottery, like oh I can put that in. They have a bunch of scratch offs. You're like okay, $5, $10 here there, but not any, like I literally look at all the prospects they picked out selected like the one I called out was I think I Minnesota State or something like that. I'm like, you're gonna get picked from a contestant in like 2 years from now. Like go to LA, say we'll take Dustin Brown, but we want your first round pick like 2 years from now. I'll get Kobe Carter like 35 and stuff. Like not this year's pick in a new draft and Kobe Glass and stuff. Like that doesn't make any sense. So like it's a matter of asset maximization.
It just, I really, I'm trying to think about like a good prospect for like what is typical. Or is it just more like they just have a ton of draft picks and then you have like competition within the ranks?
I think you need to have a foundational. I think it's a combination of both. Like okay, so they have prospect tools, so they're sorry, Buffalo, like Michael, they don't have anybody else.
They had so many.
Well, I mean, I'll and stuff. Like you know how to get, and then not do anything else. And then also as very awesome like the key parts of the minimum are his line and if those guys don't pan out, then it's all
well, like
I really hear the Jimmy Cracker might be pretty good in his regular season.
He's fast and exciting, but him on Toronto had nothing to do with like he had no value. I have a question. The issue for Toronto is they don't have this year because like the prices for farmer so high that basically there's 2 different markets right now. There's the teams that have a young star that didn't lock up for this year, and I'm paying top dollar. And the teams like Tampa Bay, Carolina, Winnipeg that have young stars that aren't quite good, but are much more cheap for rebuild around. And so that sort of limits the upside of the top prospects and brings up the depth among the other teams. So, Toronto doesn't have a Carolina like
yeah.
Put money on this. I don't know that. I'll sell all my Black Hawk sockets.
Yeah, I could definitely feel that. It's just like I was just telling Steve Burks about this. It's like there's just like this whole season's just weird. Like just everything. Like especially the West. Like there's so many teams that just like you can smell they're ready to tank. Like there's just too many of them that are about to do that.
Yeah, I mean like Alex is like okay, I mean I had
for some teams it will be as soon as somebody goes
they got a lot of
I'm just like Arizona, can you just do something? Something?
They're
really good now.
I mean, very similar. But we talked about things like very similar to that. We did that, like RGM report card, very similar to that split session player. There's such as some being the trade asset allocation, trading, drafting. Some of them are great at player development, getting players to succeed, finding the right coach, and identifying like who fits best where. And I think Arizona's done a great job in getting the right assets with Stephon trade and all that stuff. That makes sense, but you can't actually like make them work together and play together. It doesn't mean anything. So, yeah.
Okay.
Right. That's all I do like. I'll talk about on Twitter. That's it. That's it. Yeah. I gotta go to the castle. I got to the other night. I gotta go to the Bell Center.
Yeah, Apple One is nice. I'm still not gonna get over that. Yeah, Verizon 7 is just so much better. It's all the phone booth, it's like everything's just so much perfect this way now.
So my process like this real like home guarantee.
So like,
yeah.
Always oh yeah.
So we're assuming you have some kind of pattern. So we make $5 million. We can spend it on. So like, it's a super simple question to ask, but.
No, I'm very well played in the houses and all.
So
no, it's all like that. You just like literally show up there like $20, just like requesting. Yeah. Well, I've been there before. That'd be very honest.
I use both.
Yeah, that's what happens.
I just remember like DC. It's just like,
yeah, I got stranded in Birmingham and Tom overnight.
They're very exposed. Like it's not worth a lot of those guys. Those deals are very
oh yeah,
like the answer to like we guarantee 5 different things you try. It's like, oh, Yager's gonna mess this up, right? So right, like yeah, he has nothing to do with Pat Friendly has an app, and they are also clear sound. So the difference is all so you may know the total amount of bonuses, but it's typically not publicly available. What happens to do that? For 35 plus guys, you get reported because they're much more like normal things. It's like he plays 50 games. He does not. But for entry level players, it's contract. So like, there's an addendum contract. First page of the addendum is the actual terms of there's salary, signing bonus, years covered, American salary. Then there's like 6 pages to bonuses because basically there's for every season you really want this. And if you finish in any of them, you get a bonus on the side. Then for that year, you can so like maybe a third. So if you do 6 things, you still like modeling contracts to the point that Mix them all up first.
Where do you stay? I'm at the Madison. You found it?
I like that Marcus when he does the movie pick that up. I don't know. It thinks about it.
Okay, so we're gonna get started again here with our last group of talks. So there's two people. Gordon Arsenault, who works at Princeton in research their political science division, using statistics there. He has a PhD in political science as well. He is going to start off the first of two talks using Bayesian techniques.
Thanks. My mic up, people hear me. What you're going to see right here is a talk that in some ways is behind the state of the art. Why I would present that. The short answer is the state of the art caught up and passed me after I proposed this talk. But in seriousness, Corsica just released their war numbers. Corsica is doing what Many is doing there, is taking on the same task that I am for one aspect of hockey, which is shot rates. Only he's taking on the same task for shot rates and shot quality and penalty rates and zone changes all at once. So the question is, what is the benefit of talking about just shot rates, just focusing on those? And here's where you get the disappointing news that this is a methods talk. I'm choosing to zoom in on just one of the events that we care about, maybe the most important historically, but just one of the kinds of events that we care about, just to highlight techniques that can be used in models across the board. And these pretty much break down into helping us in three ways. One is that with informed Bayesian priors on our models, with more sort of creatively designed specification of the Bayesian priors, we can use more of the known knowns that we have in our from our understanding of hockey in modeling it. The second is that by using techniques to fit those models beyond just optimizing them, beyond just finding the minimum value of the objective function, as Micah talked about earlier, we can actually talk more what it is we don't know. We can talk about how certain we are. In a sense, we can use more known unknowns. The thing is, we can put those together when we apply the results of our model, when we go and calculate further things that we want to know based on what we got out of the model. So a quick overview of what it means to include a Bayesian prior belief in your model is that you are describing something you already know about the world in math terms. That's as simple as it is. And one of the biggest things that we know, it's a really obvious fact, is that players are average on average. It's downright tautological. So I think it was, I don't remember who was talking about the components of things that go into Garpin law. And for some players, we have a really small sample size, and weird things happen in small sample sizes. So there's a pretty familiar way of dealing with that, which is you apply a penalty to estimates out of your model that are large. Depending on what shape penalty you choose, this might go by the name of lasso or ridge regression or elastic net or something like that. Penalty term is just to pull estimates that are way out in the tails because you didn't have a lot of data to estimate them from back toward average. So you're going to take a player that had, 3 shots on goal for and 1 against in an entire season, and you're going to say that player is not a 75% shots on goal count player. We're going to pull that player back toward average. Of Bayesian prior, it is in fact exactly equivalent to a prior that you can write into your model in Bayesian terms, whether you use the lasso form of that or the ridge regression form or whatever. Be able to take those extreme results that we get from small samples, shrink them back toward the mean, but there's another fact that we already know about hockey, improve on that. And that is that better players get more games. The fact that we saw a small sample for a given player tells us something about the information about how good they are. As a guy named David Robinson pointed out on his blog, regular players, on average, are better than replacement players. That's why we have the idea of replacement level. What we would really like to do, if we can, is not just shrink estimates from players that we have small samples for about their ability on one dimension or another, back toward the mean. We would kind of like to figure out an informed level that's somewhere below the mean to shrink those estimates back toward. And so what I'm doing with this model that I call SALLOW, which just covers rates of shots on goal as a function of individual player abilities that we estimate, is I am adding a term to the type of model that we run for that in general, that just estimates the number of games players are getting as a function of the ability estimate that we're deriving for them, that we're getting from the model. So here's an executive summary of what I ran. The main term in the model is just an ordered logit model for net shots on goal. And in reality, it should be Corsi. Shots on goal is an error on my part because people don't really care about that. And it's as a function of which players were on the ice at a time. So as BMAC was saying, this is just one kind of regression model that's appropriate for the kind of data that we have, which could be only -1 for a shot for the away team, or 0 or +1. And all the covariates that we're estimating an independent effect for are individual players. That's pretty familiar. The second term is a Gaussian or normal distribution prior belief about the spread of players' abilities overall. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to let the model figure out how broad this is, but we think that the overall shape of the distribution of player ability levels looks something like the standard normal bell curve. The third part I'm adding is that simultaneously with these two things, I am estimating a beta binomial regression where the outcomes are games played and the inputs are the ability estimates that we get from the ordered logit model. So what this does is effectively, it just shifts the mean of the prior belief, the mean that we pull players back toward, up or down, depending on if we happen to see a lot of games from them or not. It finds an appropriate level for us to shrink small sample size players back toward that is different from the overall average ability level in the NHL. I fit this with a Monte Carlo method. I do not use plain old optimization for fitting this model for reasons that I'll get into later, but one of the big ones is that third term, that beta binomial regression that I threw in there. That is weird. Optimization does not perform well on it. And something that is more flexible, such as Monte Carlo algorithm for estimating the parameters of the model, is a little more suitable. So I fit this model, estimate the ability of every player to contribute to net shots on goal. And a first thing to do is, okay, let's check if this actually, if this new thing I am adding is fairly sane. So what I've got on the x-axis here is what it looks like if I fit that model, but I take out the new term that I'm adding. If I take out the beta binomial for games played. And on the y-axis is the estimate for the shots on goal percentage talent of the same player, but including that that extra term. And I think this quick sanity check is one that it passes. It's not distorting our estimates too much. You can see on the graph it is doing about twice as much work on these players in Indigo here with very few games played as it is doing on players with more of them. And it is tending to shift the estimates of ability level for players we didn't see very much down. And again, it's mostly acting on those players. It passes some other kind of nice sanity checks too. Year to year, the ability estimates, the change in ability estimate is a little more predictable when the beta binomial term is included. So throwing data on something other than shots, on how many games a player got in a given season into the model with an appropriate functional form is helping us stabilize our understanding of how good that player is at driving net shots on goal. I have a bigger write-up of these results that I present at this web address, sallowhockey.net, which I have to update to reflect the fact that the state of the art has caught up to and passed this talk, which it wasn't when I first started the website. This is an example of the kind of graph that I put out there. So on the x-axis, we've got just the estimated shots on goal percentage ability, assuming neutral teammates and competition for each of these players. And so, I mean, this at least passes the eye test quickly. Okay, we've got, Hampus Lindholm is driving net shot generation. Lucas Spiza is dragging net shot generation. Okay, fine. One feature of what I've got out there up on the web that I want to point out is there are some actual error bars on these estimates. This is a point that that Meredith, you were making a bunch earlier. When we report these sort of one number type metrics, even when we report component metrics a lot, we often do not see a report of the amount of uncertainty that's in them. I have got that, and I am including it. And you can see the error bars on this term are not insubstantial. I think it's important to emphasize, and this is going to be a segue into the next slide. It is important, I think, for us to emphasize when we're promoting this work that statistical work comes with uncertainty, and we can quantify how much uncertainty there is. As Allison was pointing out earlier, we're going to run into arguments that want to knock down a straw man concept of what we're doing with analytics from people who are going to say, okay, team or player X had a high rating, you thought they were going to be great, and they failed this time. And one of the biggest defenses, I think, against that is always, whatever we're doing, make sure we keep track of how much uncertainty we have and report it. There is always going to be some complication in that. That is not an easy thing to do. Our estimates have error, but when we do further computations, when we apply those estimates, when we're trying to predict things from the terms that we estimated, it's hard to use that because we have to, at some point, drop one number into a formula. And the basic way to cheat at this, instead of doing a whole bunch of algebra on probability distribution of your estimate, is to repeat the application a whole bunch of times over a whole bunch of different randomly sampled plausible values of your estimate. So going back, okay, maybe in 2016, Hampus Lindholm's shots on goal ability really was about 54. Or maybe it was about 53.5. Or maybe it was all the way up at 56. By taking samples from the model, rather than just plugging in our point-like estimates, repeating the same applications and averaging over them, essentially, we can do a good job of kicking error bars forward into the projections that we're making, the auxiliary calculations that we're doing, into the applications, the actual use cases of the models we run. To do that, of course, you need to have a lot of plausible values of the quantities that you're estimating, of the ability levels in the case of Sallow that you're estimating. When you fit models with a Monte Carlo method, you get that by default. The results you get out are just by definition a bunch of samples from the probability distribution of the thing that you're trying to estimate. If you use other methods, you may still be able to get those kinds of samples post hoc, depending on what model you ran. Some of them are not amenable to it. I'll talk more about that later if you're interested. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about what kinds of things we can apply when we take the fact that we have a distribution of our estimates and the fact that we have an informed mathematical description of what we think is going on, how we can put those together and derive some really interesting applications. So, question that I've already given away at the title of the slide, about how good is a typical NHL player that played 0 games. So when we estimate the Sallow model, it forms an idea of NHL skater ability for a given number of games played. It says, okay, the distribution of ability levels, given that this person got 20 or 52 games or something should look like so. We can go ahead and plug in 0 games. There's nothing that says we can't plug in 0. And an NHL player with 0 games turns out to have some interesting uses as a mathematical construct that we can look at. Now, once again, we don't want to just take a single point-like idea of how good that player is because we have uncertainty about it. But we can still draw plausible values of, ability levels for a skater that's otherwise typical of NHL players, except they didn't happen to get into any games. A first way we can employ that idea is to construct a somewhat less poor man's idea of replacement player. So if we have a model that forms an idea of what a typical NHL skater looks like for a given number of games played, and we plug in 0 games played and ask for the distribution of ability levels for that kind of player, that seems to fit the definition pretty well of what a replacement player is. We didn't do any ad hoc, additional assuming about, trying to figure out on our own what talent level that player is at. We just ask the model that has already fit this. Okay, what's the range of of shot driving talent, so to speak, that we would expect a player otherwise typical of NHLers, but who wasn't used last season, to exhibit. So you want to calculate value above replacement you want to value above replacement due to how a player drives shot rates. Okay, take all the samples that you started with, all the plausible values of the parameter estimates that you started with. For each one, draw a plausible value of replacement player ability from the distribution that your model figured out, and subtract wins as you choose to calculate them, as you choose to figure them for each player from wins for that replacement. Another application of the idea of an NHL typical player with 0 games played is in correcting bias in aging curves. So I think it was Steve who brought up the delta method earlier as sort of the primitive take on how to project ability, just taking the mean change in a stat, whatever stat you care about, between every pair of adjacent ages, and connecting them with a curve. The parametric, a little bit more data efficient way to do that would be to just regress the change from year to year in the stat you're looking at on age. And I have done that at the website. Luke Solberg, though, points out that, of course, the delta method has survivor bias built in. You don't see the stats for the players that drop out of the league, and they might systematically differ from the ones that remain in the league year to year. The way to get around that, state of the art, probably you're pretty well read on it, is you have to come up with a phantom value for the ability level that for the stat that you think is appropriate to someone that didn't survive within the data set from year to year. Well, what's an appropriate value for someone that doesn't appear but they played last year? It might be something like the estimated ability level or range of ability levels for an otherwise typical NHL skater who didn't happen to get in any games. I go ahead and calculate aging curves, and this is actually the thanks. This is the differential. It's the slope of it. You can see that I'm putting error bars on the curve calculated with the delta method. We can do that with the type of techniques that I've outlined here. I have some, there's a whole lot to expand about the work. As I said, it's kind of behind the state of the art, but the takeaways are, look, we can use even more of what we already know than we do, largely via designing Bayesian priors for our models. We can use more unknown, more of what we don't know by using plausible values, and a lot of them as in our applications, and we can derive useful applications from our model itself.
Alrighty, so now we are on to our last speaker for the day. And first goal? Yeah. First class. So we obviously save the best for last. No. So Cole Anderson, you might know as a crowdsourced sports, I'm sure, right? Something like that, yeah. Currently a senior data analyst at Digitas LBI, a technology and marketing agency. Previously worked in the antitrust practice of economics consultancy with the highlight, lowlight of advising during the most recent NHL lockout. He's a former goaltender, playing in the AJHL, BCHL, and collegiately at Amherst College.
No, it's good goalie. The last is, we need sometimes get a little coddled, so it's good. This is kind of an obnoxious slide, but Digitas threw some money on here, so I put the logo up there. So I was a goalie, so if some of this sounds like, I'm kind of justifying, my own mediocre career, then you're probably right. So what am I doing here? What are we talking about? Trying to create a, metric to isolate goaltender performance, and there's been different iterations of this, and I'll try to few new things out. And ultimately, we're trying to see if we can predict future performance, which is kind of the goal for a lot of metrics that we like to create and stuff like that. So kind of the key takeaway is we're using like shot quality to kind of adjust how goaltenders perform, and then we're also going to like dive into rebounds and try to adjust for those. And I think that just from what I've done and it requires more research is the rebound adjustment helps more than the shot quality adjustment. And then there's also this a Bayesian framework, like an application that helps the telex a little dramatic. That helps as well. So we'll kind of get to that. But that's the overview. So first of all, expected goals model. This is like a pretty. This is pretty like smart crowd. So like you guys have like a good idea like of what expected goals are, and like their strengths and weaknesses. I just wanted to touch on a few things. And it was great. Devin's presentation was great because that passive data, that's the stuff that we're really missing. What we see here is just like this event-driven data. We don't see the underlying kind of deeper networks that would necessarily make up, because goaltending is like a pretty simple position. Puck moves around, you take a position, you make a save, you don't make a save. We don't know how that puck moves around necessarily. We don't know the other players on the ice, but someday we will, and like that gives me a little hope, I guess. So this is kind of like an overview. Also, and I should note, I build off of work other people in this room, and this is also important that there's like data biases. Like we think this is an objective, like expected goals metric, but like there's a lot of like biases in the data, including like the recording. So we have to adjust for that, which is no fun. This is like a shot distance, a big portion of expected goals, and you can see like sometimes the home team records their shots significantly closer. And this is home and team in the same, like a home and away shots in the same game, but when like the Rangers are playing at MSG, those games had shots way closer than when they were playing elsewhere in the league, and like there's biases to that. So we can adjust for that, and thanks to other work people have done here. But kind of the thing that we're left with is like what other like score or team level biases haven't we discovered or can't be normalized just because it's a tricky problem. So that was the first part. So then the next little bit more novel is like the rebound control. So we have to think about what an expected goal is. And so thinking about it from a goaltender perspective, we have like one of the things that goalies can control is rebounds. They're perceived control, but like for example here, like let's say there's like touch anything for the rebound, but like this clearly should not have been. It's a terrible rebound. So like, how do we deal with that? And it's like kind of a tricky problem. So you can see here, like I made these numbers up, but like 2% of the time a point shot goes in, and obviously not an unscreened one, but like you don't see that in the data. And then like the puck moves the radians per second, and so like the next shot's like very high, but like clearly that should never been a rebound. So and then it comes this problem like, okay, imagine like I'm playing goal, like Kucherov comes in a breakaway, I make a save. That's like a third of an expected goal, and then there's a rebound. It changes like degrees per second, pretty high. And, I stop Stamkos, and then degrees change. I go to the other side of the net and make another save. So like I've made 3 saves, all like pretty substantial expected goals against. But if you add them up, it's like more than a goal. So like, how do you prevent more than a goal in like a sequence of like a couple seconds? So thankfully, that's been touched on. Danny Page, I think he was the first one to write about it. But like these, and that's the last point there. These are like multiplicative, not like additive. So like we're implying that the first shot like has a chance of being a goal. So that we kind of have to like. You can't have like more than a goal in a flourish. So we have to adjust it, and I think Money Puck does a good job of like explaining how like the flurry adjustment for expected goals works. And so, but that still doesn't get to the point that like if you go back to this Bernier example, like this shouldn't have been a chance in the first place. So basically, what I did was I created a rebound model, which is I used the same like features as I had for an expected goal model. They're very similar, it just predicts less. So and it kind of makes, it's just like less powerful. It kind of makes sense in the sense that like any given shot has a chance of a rebound, because like rebounds are kind of these weird things that like nobody really wants to rebound, but like sometimes they happen. It might jump over somebody's stick, the other time it might land right on it. And basically the takeaways for this is like they're tough to prevent. There's nobody that's really good in the league at doing it. And they're tough to differentiate in the sense that like once you give a rebound up, nobody's really good at making that save afterwards. So first of all, what is a rebound? This is like leg seconds from the first shot. So like you can see like, I think everybody I know classifies like between 1 and 2 seconds, but you can kind of see that after 3 seconds, the observed probability of goal is like a little higher than like 4, 5, 6, 7. So like I don't know if there's maybe a slow finger in like a couple ranks around the league, or something like that. I haven't really dived into it, but like I know like 2 is like kind of the standard cutoff, and that's what I use. But you can see why this is kind of tough to model. But it does, and so this is like expected rebounds over actual rebounds. It nobody really jumps out. So they're tough to like prevent, and like people go like up and down from year to year. And this is like once you give a rebound up, the skill in making the save on that rebound is less correlated than. So basically, what I did here was I split goalie seasons into random samples. So one half of the year and the other half of the year, and see how much they correlated. So are we capturing skill, or are they kind of luck? So you can see non-rebound shots. There's a little bit of skill that we got to signal. Rebound shots, once they're out there, it doesn't matter who you are. It's a tougher skill to make that save. So like we have this. It's pretty. This is basically looking at like the expected goals flurry. Kind of create a flurry of shots. So I give up a rebound and then expected goals. You chain them together. That infers like a probability of goal of like 27% of the time. Observed goal percentage after a rebound is about 27% too. So you're really looking at a quarter of a goal. So what I wanted to do here was, just create the rebound model, and then just take the first shot, and then have a small probability of a rebound based on like the rebound model. And then if it hits a 1, just like simulate that as a quarter of a goal against, and then see what the goalie does on those like first shots. And so to get to the bottom of this, we're going to test it. And then there's also the Bayesian application that we layers on after this. And so I'll try to go through this quickly, but I put together like a Bayesian prior. So this is like, it's more of an application than like a true Bayesian analysis, but like I know like 9 saves out of 10 is the same as same percentage as like 90 out of 100, but it's like way different information. You can filter this, and I see a lot of this like with X amount of minutes. This is the top save percentage leaders, etc. But we can actually like use like a little Bayesian technique to like kind of try to capture, not throw out that information basically. But the prior is like kind of sticky subject in some like Bayesian circles, so we have a way to deal with that hopefully. So we created a beta distribution, which is basically you can create a beta distribution for things between 0 or 1, which are like either goals or saves. And then so this is the observed save percentage and the expected save percentage. And I'll be using expected save percentage just so I kind of adjust it on a goalie to goalie basis. And because like the idea of expected goals is some goalies face tougher shots than others. And so they kind of turns this question of like, how good is Matt Hurd, right? Because he's obviously one of the last 2 cups, and like best way to do any hockey analysis is whoever wins the cup, you just try to do what they do. But he hasn't been in the league that long, so does he have enough sample size to say, oh, this guy is like top whatever? So the true answer is like whatever. Okay, so this is like in action, how I would try to like visualize like the prior, which is the expected save percentage. So as Pittsburgh, and this is cumulative, so like as Pittsburgh has been playing, like we expect like what is it, like 91%. The green is his actual save percentage, so that's cool. Like and a lot of and I've posted like this stuff. It's like the expected goal lifted would be the difference between the expected save percentage, the mean that distribution, and like his actual save percentage. But you can see like it's can be quite large in small samples, right? But then you have this the difference between the final posterior distribution, which basically bakes in sample size. So that blue bar, the difference between the red bar and the blue bar is the signal I'm going after. So like I said, this is more of a Bayesian application than it is necessarily like a front to back Bayesian analysis. And so how big is that blue bar is the signal I'm interested in, but it also is very dependent on the prior. So you can see, so the prior, so how far does he exceed the expected save percentage? Well, it depends on the prior, right? And so here's different priors. And this gets tricky, like I said, there's a whole like background of like Bayesian analysis, but like how much of the prior do we want to use? I'm kind of, claiming ignorance. I don't really know. But so what I decided to do, this is just like another little, this is plotting the same thing with priors. So you can see like the 100-shot prior, all of a sudden, like after the first game, he's the best goalie, and then like it just kind of jumps around with a stronger prior. Basically, what we're doing is like saying we're taking a league average goalie. We're saying, okay, this goalie had 3,000 shots. Now we're going to layer like Matt Murray's like actual performance on there, and so he had 3,000 shots of being league average, and now he's got a couple like 1,000 shots of like Matt Murray, and like how's he do? So like that's kind of the idea behind the prior. So like I said, I kind of popped out and I just said what predicts the best. So try to wrap this up. We have like a couple metrics. We have like raw save percentage. We have the expected goals lift without any Bayesian application. We have the Bayesian lift, which that was that blue bar that I showed for each. So we have a couple metrics we want to test. I have like 6 past seasons. I had to kind of have a look back range. So like I have like 10 seasons of data, but I need to be able to look back like a couple years. So I'm going to test the look back, the Marcel, which Steve already touched on. So I use the Marcel framework here. Then I use like a couple parameters for age regression. Basically, I'll visualize that later. And then this prior strength. So I put this in a grid, and you have like over 200 like combinations of like these parameters. So I just put them in, run it all, super easy. This is what I found. So like to answer the prior question, and this is also with the look back seasons, 4 had the best predictivity. After about like 1,000 to 1,500 shots, you kind of max out. You don't add any real benefit to the prior. So that's kind of the lesson there. And it's also like the blue line, when you only have one look back season, it like slopes up like slightly because it like wants more information. When you have 4 seasons, like the prior it tops out a little quicker. This is how the age parameters work. They're basically you can kind of like see a semblance of like an aging curve. So basically what I did here is like, and this is kind of on the test design, which kind of talked about this model has the framework I use, kind of has my own inherent biases and like weaknesses to it. But linear aging curve where we forget about older results quicker, so you can kind of see where there's that middle band kind of on the. So how do I explain this best? But we don't want to be aggressively. We kind of want like the middle road of we're forgetting about the past seasons quicker, and but we're not doing it too quickly. So and we're not treating it 22. Okay, so and this is the summary of kind of the 5 metrics I described, or the combinations of the correlations between our weighted Marcels. So that's the best would have been like the 4 seasons, and this is just the top 30 metrics. So, or sorry, the top 30 results. So like the median and mean are kind of the same, very close to max. So sorry, that's some extra information. So the Bayesian expected goal lift over expected with the rebound adjustment performed really well. Without that rebound adjustment, the Bayesian expected goal lift performed a little less well, and then you have expected goal lift with rebound adjustment. So you can see here where like both rebound adjustment and the Bayesian kind of framework help us out. And actually the cool thing here is like save percentage didn't do that bad under this framework, which is good because like if you were to try to apply this to say say we were trying to work in AHL data, you would have like the kind of the means to be able to do that because you would have like shots and goals. You wouldn't be able to adjust for rebounds because you don't, unless you have like some sort of play-by-play data. So to go back to the Matt Murray thing, I don't know, just to tell a story. This is the projections for this year, and they're clearly right. I think like Carey Price is tearing it up this year, so I think I nailed all of them. No, but this is projections for this year. I did this one instead of like what I projected or what was like the power ranking at the end of 2017. This has no 2018 data or 2017, 2018 data, obviously. But it would be nice to have like that little mini season of like 7 games where you'd have guys kind of moving the needle a little bit, but not that much. Memory at the end of last year was like, I think 7 or 8, but like the projections just based on like age moving around, now he's 5. I thought I'd include 5 just because it, maybe a ruffle a feather or 2. I don't know, but 5 feels right. So summary, basic framework good, modeling rebounds, it's a pain, but it also helps because rebounds are kind of noise for the system. But there's still some weaknesses here. A lot of it comes from like, expected goals. We would like a better more data basically. And then also like the distribution talent of like goalie, like true goalie talent is like tight. Like there's a lot of good goalies. So sometimes it's going to be tough to like really differentiate. Obviously there's some next steps, expand sample AHL data. It looks good on the slide. It's tough in practice. And I've updated my expected goals model and different frameworks. Like I said, this framework had some of I made some assumptions, and there's better ways to do things. So thank you.
Gordon. One.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we'll start with questions for these guys before we wrap up. Of course.
So, Cole, sorry, over here. Question for you about rebounds, and particularly that, what was it, 2 seconds?
Yeah.
And then after 2 seconds, kind of things even out. Coming from my own perspective, I'm wondering the extent to which you're taking the kinematics into account. Physics is so different in hockey than in every other sport because there's, not that the puck has a mind of its own, but once it gets going, it really gets going, and players only have so much control. And so I'm wondering if it's something you could basically investigate further, where in having the rebound, the closer in it is, hence the less far away it's gone, it's going to have more kinetic energy on it, so it's more likely to kick off faster. It's also probably more likely to get hit in a random direction, which makes it harder for the goalie to intercept, especially if it's that close in.
Right.
And so you were talking about particularly randomness in there. If you could get the data, even just tracking the puck, not necessarily the players, I'm wondering if there's something you could do with that to sort of eliminate your randomness or figure out your space away.
I mean, obviously the actual having the puck track would be huge. Actually, one thing I didn't jump into the expected goals model. We can see where the one shot was, and we can see where the next shot is. So I do calculate that angular difference, and then there's also the time. We have timestamp, so it's either 1 second, 2 seconds. But actually, what I did, and this is kind of more to your point, to have that actual kinetic, the term that I used in my model is the angular distance divided by time. I think I might have thrown a log in there, but so this is say that most shots that end up a rebound are probably going pretty fast. So it's probably it was more accurate than just 1 second, 2 seconds. It's and I get worried about this all the time. There's these scores are there's no real difference between 0 and 2 seconds for them. So
distance traveled sort of made the most sense for my model. So, but to have the actual like kinetics behind it would be huge.
This question's for Cole as well. You talked about rebounds and you gave the Bernier example. Do you ever think about weighting rebounds differently between like a good rebound and a bad rebound? Because the Bernier example is good, it's a terrible rebound to give up, but if you put it into the corner where there's a low probability of scoring from, do you ever think that that's going to be weighted differently?
Yeah, I mean, that would be nice, but like, so it makes sense for me to like deal with it by throwing it out, but like, that's also because we don't know necessarily, that we only see shots or something like that. I also like, it's interesting because like, I did play goalie and like, you know, when you leave, like, you have a chance to freeze the puck or whatever, or direct it over the glass, or, you know, retain control, and you know, you leave it in the corner or something like that. And like, maybe there's not a shot right away, but eventually, like, there's a consistent pressure, and then 15 seconds later, there's a good chance to answer a goal, and you're like, that is on me, right? So, but we just don't have that, right? All we see are like these like little brief flashes, and so instead of like smartly weighting things, which I wish I could, it's just like, let's throw it up. And like, judge goalie based on like, yeah, any given shot might be a rebound, but like, if there's a rebound, hopefully we've already like modeled that implicitly, and then like compare what actually happens.
So this question is for both of you. So one of the benefits of a Bayesian model is it smooths out sort of outliers and especially for small sample sizes. But in some certain instances, I guess, is there a scenario where a player has such a crazy performance or a crazy string of performances that so far push out the outliers? So for example, if we're talking about football, the quarterback throws for 300 yards in like 5 straight games, and the first 5 games as a rookie. Well, then the Bayesian prior may not accurately reflect that player's true talent level, just sort of on the basis of that. So I guess my question is, for both of your models, what would be an outlier like that to sort of push past the normal performance that would be expected by the days?
I don't have quite a direct answer to that question. I'm maybe one of the more dogmatic Bayesians that you're going to run into. What the type of solution that I take to that effectively folks like, even though they're doing this in a non-Bayesian framework, that folks like Manny do developing the components of war, et cetera, is to develop a model that's not just Bayesian, but that is hierarchical. And what that is starting for is you let the data themselves tell you how strong the prior should be. So if you have one rookie that is just beating the entire world, if you have, you know, Connor McDavid rookie season, what you get when you build a hierarchical model is okay, I'm going to say sort of what shape I think my beliefs take. You know, I think talent is distributed Gaussian in shape, or I think it's distributed Laplace or something like that. But I'm not going to impose the strength of that belief. I'm going to let the data find a good value for that. And then, you know, if you have Connor McDavid just beating the entire world, something like that, as a rookie, then what he does is he helps tell the model, don't make that assumption too strongly. I think hierarchical modeling is at least the within Bayesianism answer to that question, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And like, it's so specific goalies, I can't honestly really imagine like what a Connor McDavid goalie would look like. So like, there's a lot of good goalies in the league, and so I wouldn't have like the outliers don't keep me up at night, especially like specific like hockey analytics. Like it's, I don't know, it's the value, the outliers are there for a reason, like, they don't really, they don't need to like worry about figuring out if time of day is good or not, right? Anyways, yeah, so, I don't, it's a very good question though.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for spending the day here. Thanks for all the speakers. Thanks for everyone for all the questions. Yeah, that was a really good series of talks, and yeah, I really appreciate all the interest and everything. So thank you guys for coming. There's a couple things that we want to announcements we want to make. One, if you had gotten a ticket to the RIT game today, we have them, so come down afterwards to claim them. Two, there happen to be RIT students here who are interested in tracking games for the hockey team. Come talk to me.
So we have a game at 7. Now we're gonna have some free time here. Feel free to do as you will. After the game, we will most likely be going back over to McGregor's car I went to last night for some late night volley. So yeah. So just thank you all for coming. Thank you to all the panelists, presenters. Appreciate you. I got nothing else.
Feel free to take any of the food that's still out there.
Yeah.
Man, I'd love to go out tonight, but I have this numerical analysis exam on Tuesday. Hard ass of a professor, yeah. Yeah.